Chapter 861. Heavenly Violet Pill. Inside the ornate box lay 5 pills that seemed to capture the very essence of spring itself. Each one was perfectly spherical, about the size of a large pearl, with a deep violet color that seemed to shift and swirl like living liquid. Tiny flecks of what looked like crystallized starlight dotted their surfaces, and the faint fragrance that rose from them carried notes of plum blossoms and something indefinably pure. "Heavenly violet pills," Emo said with quiet pride, his voice carrying the reverence of someone discussing a masterpiece. Each one represents years of preparation and resources that would bankrupt most organizations. I stared at the pills, feeling power radiating from them in waves that made my enhanced senses tingle. Whatever these were, they operated on principles that went far beyond normal alchemical theory. "What exactly are they?" Serafina asked, leaning closer to study the contents of the box. Her ice-blue eyes reflected genuine amazement at whatever she was sensing from the pills. "Concentrated understanding," Emo replied with the kind of careful precision that suggested he was choosing his words very deliberately. "Each pill contains the refined essence of blossoming, not just the physical process, but the conceptual framework that underlies all growth and transformation." He gestured toward the pills with something approaching reverence. "The base ingredients alone are priceless. 3 different parts from 9-star beasts in their most concentrated amount. And etherite?" I observed, recognizing the distinctive shimmer that marked the presence of the universe's most precious substance. "How much?" 300 grams per pill," Emo said quietly, and I felt my breath catch at the implications. Etherite was precious without comparison. It was the material I introduced into this world, and even a gram was more than enough to create high-quality potions and elixirs, let alone 300 grams. "But the etherite isn't just an ingredient," he continued with growing intensity. "It's the medium that allows the conceptual essence to maintain coherent form. We used it to bind the pure idea of blossoming, the moment when potential becomes reality, when dormancy transforms into active growth." Serafina stared at her father with something approaching awe. "How is that even possible? Binding abstract concepts into physical form requires theoretical knowledge that shouldn't exist. Mount Hua sect has been developing this technique for 3 generations, Emo explained with obvious pride. But it was only made possible because of etherite." I reached out carefully to touch one of the pills, feeling immediate resonance with something deep inside my consciousness. "The purpose," Emo continued, "is to provide direct experiential understanding of blossoming rather than requiring years of gradual comprehension. Someone who digests one of these pills will gain intuitive knowledge of growth patterns, transformation principles, and the delicate balance between potential and manifestation, as well as the mana itself, which would significantly accelerate Arthur's mastery of the violet mist divine art," Serafina said with growing understanding. "Exactly," Emo confirmed with satisfaction. I studied the pills more carefully, noting subtle differences between them despite their apparent uniformity. "Are they all identical?" "Yes," Emo nodded. "These pills are just for family." The generosity of the gift was staggering. Not just the material value, though that was enormous, but the trust it represented. Emo was offering to share Mount Hua sect's most advanced knowledge with someone who, despite our personal relationship, was still technically an outsider. "Emo," I said carefully, "this is incredibly generous, but I can't accept something this valuable without understanding what you expect in return." "I expect you to become stronger," he replied with absolute sincerity. "Strong enough to protect my daughter, strong enough to face whatever threats emerge, strong enough to honor the trust our family is placing in you." His words carried weight that went beyond simple expectation. This wasn't just about personal relationships. It was about continental politics, family alliances, and the kind of strength needed to maintain stability in an increasingly dangerous world. "The other expectation," he continued with a slight smile, "is that you'll use this knowledge to elevate the violet mist divine art beyond its current limitations, create the 5th movement you promised, and perhaps even lay the groundwork for future advances." "I can do that," I said with growing certainty. The theoretical gaps in my understanding had been the primary limitation on my progress with Mount Hua techniques. If these pills could provide the missing foundations, then take your pill, Mo said with encouraging authority. The others can wait, but yours should be consumed as soon as possible to maximize the benefits. I carefully lifted the pill designated for me, noting how it seemed to pulse with inner light that resonated with my heartbeat. The moment my fingers made contact, I felt gray energy responding with something that might have been anticipation. Is there anything I should know about the process? I asked, remembering past experiences with powerful alchemical preparations that had unexpected side effects. Find somewhere private and quiet, Mo advised. The pill will take several hours to fully digest, and the process involves significant internal energy fluctuations. You'll want to be undisturbed while your consciousness integrates the new understanding. The family meditation chambers are available, Serafina suggested. They're specifically designed for this kind of intensive cultivation work. Perfect, I agreed, then looked back at Mo with genuine gratitude. Thank you. This kind of trust and generosity, I'll make sure it's not misplaced. I know you will, Mo replied with paternal confidence. Now go. The sooner you begin the integration process, the sooner we can move forward with investigating Ren's disappearance. I stood, carefully cradling the pill while Serafina gave me directions to the meditation chambers. The weight of what I was about to undertake settled over me. Not just the physical process of digesting the pill, but the responsibility that came with accepting such advanced knowledge. Arthur, Mo called as I reached the door. Remember that blossoming isn't about force or speed. It's about understanding the perfect moment when potential is ready to become reality. I nodded with appreciation for the guidance, then made my way through Mount Hua Sect's winding corridors toward the private meditation chambers. Other disciples bowed respectfully as I passed, though I barely noticed their deference. My attention was focused entirely on the pill in my hand and the possibilities it represented. The meditation chamber was a masterpiece of functional design, perfectly circular, with walls carved from single pieces of mountain stone and acoustic properties that seemed to absorb all external sound. Crystalline formations embedded in the ceiling provided gentle illumination, while carefully placed ventilation ensured optimal air circulation. I settled into the lotus position at the chamber's center, holding the heavenly violet pill up to study it one final time. The concentrated essence of blossoming, the theoretical knowledge of 3 generations, the trust of a family that had become my own, all of it crystallized into this single sphere. Taking a deep breath, I placed the pill on my tongue and felt it dissolve immediately into pure energy that tasted like spring rain and infinite possibility. Chapter 862. Nostalgia. The integration process was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. As the heavenly violet pill dissolved, waves of understanding crashed through my consciousness like a spring flood breaking through winter ice. It wasn't just knowledge being transferred. It was pure comprehension of concepts I'd been struggling with for months, suddenly crystallizing into perfect clarity. Blossoming. I finally got it. Not just the mechanics of coaxing flowers to open or the theoretical frameworks Mo had tried to teach me, but the fundamental truth underlying all growth and transformation. The precise moment when potential becomes reality, when dormancy gives way to active manifestation, when something hidden finally reveals its true nature. The pill's mana merged with my existing energy reserves, but this wasn't ordinary mana. It carried the concentrated essence of every spring morning, every first bloom, every moment when life chose to emerge despite uncertainty. Hours passed in deep meditation as I processed the transformation. When I finally opened my eyes, the chamber felt different. Smaller somehow, as if my perception had expanded beyond its previous limits. I could sense the mountain around me not just as stone and earth, but as a living system where countless small growths and changes were happening every moment. Standing up felt strange at first, like my body needed to remember how to move after such intensive internal work. But as I stretched and tested my balance, I could feel the difference. The violet mist divine art techniques that had been frustratingly difficult before now felt intuitive, like skills I'd possessed for years rather than struggled to learn for weeks. I stepped out of the meditation chamber to find the corridors much busier than when I'd entered. Word had apparently spread that the second hero was visiting Mount Hua sect, and disciples were gathering with the kind of excited energy that meant something significant was about to happen. Arthur. Mo's voice carried across the courtyard as I emerged into the evening air. How do you feel? Different, I replied honestly, still processing the scope of what had changed. Like I finally understand something I'd been looking at sideways for months. Good, he said with satisfaction, then gestured toward the assembled crowd of sect members. Now come. It's time for Mount Hua to properly welcome the second hero. What followed was both overwhelming and touching. The entire sect had turned out, from senior disciples to kitchen staff. Everyone wanted to see the person who defeated a calamity and earned recognition as one of the world's two greatest heroes. But this wasn't the formal, respectful acknowledgement I'd received in political settings. This felt like a family celebrating one of their own. 3 cheers for Arthur Nightingale, someone shouted from the crowd. The second hero trained here, called another voice. Mount Hua sect's pride. The enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself grinning despite the formal nature of the situation. These people weren't cheering for political reasons or because protocol demanded it. They were genuinely excited that someone connected to their sect had achieved something extraordinary. Li Zenith stepped forward with a ceremonial sword across his palms. Arthur, as deputy sect leader, I present you with this blade, forged from the same mountain iron that created the swords of our greatest masters. May it serve you as well as Mount Hua techniques have. The sword was beautiful, with a simple elegance that spoke to centuries of refined craftsmanship. But more than its physical properties, I could feel the symbolic weight. This was acceptance, recognition, a formal acknowledgement that I belonged here. Thank you, I said, accepting the blade with appropriate ceremony. Mount Hua sect has given me more than techniques or weapons. It's given me understanding, family, and a place to call home. The crowd erupted in approval, and for the next hour I found myself caught up in conversations with disciples who wanted to hear stories about recent battles, masters who shared technical insights about advanced sword work, and administrative staff who seemed genuinely delighted to meet someone they'd heard so much about. It was Serafina who finally rescued me from the enthusiastic crowd, appearing at my elbow with perfect timing. Father wants to speak with you, she said with amusement that suggested she'd been watching me get overwhelmed by well-wishers. We made our way back to Mo's private study, where he was waiting with tea and the satisfied expression of someone who'd watched an important ceremony go exactly as planned. The sect needed that, he explained as we settled around his table. Having you here, seeing you accept their welcome, it reminds everyone that Mount Hua produces people who matter on the world stage. I'm honored by their acceptance, I replied sincerely, and grateful for everything this place has given me. Speaking of which, Mo continued, glancing toward the windows where the sun was setting behind the mountain peaks. It's getting quite late. You should stay the night rather than traveling in darkness. I looked outside, surprised to realize how much time had passed during the pill integration and subsequent welcome ceremony. The meditation had taken longer than I'd expected, and the celebration afterward had stretched into evening. That sounds reasonable, I agreed. Is there somewhere? You'll stay in the family quarters, of course. Mo interrupted with the kind of casual authority that brooked no argument. Serafina can show you to the guest room we keep ready for important visitors. Thank you, I said, though something in Mo's tone suggested this arrangement had been planned rather than spontaneous. Excellent, he replied with satisfaction. Now you two should get some rest. Tomorrow we begin investigating Ren's disappearance in earnest, and I suspect we'll need all our energy for whatever we discover. We said our goodnights and made our way toward the family residential section of the sect complex. The corridors here were quieter, more intimate, decorated with personal touches that spoke to generations of Zenith family history. This way, Serafina said, leading me through familiar passages toward the guest quarters. But as we walked, her pace slowed, and I could sense something on her mind. What is it? I asked when she stopped completely near a window overlooking the mountain gardens. She was quiet for a moment, her ice-blue eyes reflecting moonlight as she gazed out at the familiar landscape. Being back here with you, it brings back so many memories. Good ones, I hope. The best ones, she confirmed with a soft smile. All those afternoons training together, figuring out how to make your techniques work with ours, discovering that we could be partners in ways that went beyond just combat. I moved to stand beside her at the window, following her gaze toward the gardens where we'd spent countless hours practicing and talking and slowly falling in love. I was thinking, she continued, her voice taking on the slightly hesitant tone she used when suggesting something she really wanted but wasn't sure about. The private waterfall we saw earlier. It's been such a long time since we've had a chance to just be ourselves there. Understanding dawned as I realized what she was suggesting. You want to go for a swim, just like we used to, she said, turning to face me directly. Before everything became so complicated with continental politics and cosmic responsibilities. When it was just us, and the water, and all the time in the world to remember why we fell in love. The invitation carried layers of meaning that went beyond simple recreation. A chance to reconnect with who we'd been before the weight of heroic status had changed everything. An opportunity to find the simple intimacy that had gotten lost amid larger responsibilities. I'd love that, I said honestly. It feels like forever since we've had time for just us. Her smile brightened with genuine happiness. Meet me at the waterfall in an hour? That'll give us both time to change into something more appropriate for swimming. It's a date? I agreed, feeling something warm and anticipatory settle in my chest. As we continued toward the guest quarters, I found myself looking forward to the evening ahead more than I had to anything in weeks. Not because of what might happen, but because of what definitely would happen. Time with Serafina, away from politics and crises and cosmic conspiracies, in a place that held some of our most treasured memories. Sometimes the simplest pleasures were the most precious ones. Chapter 863, Under the Stars. An hour later, I made my way through the moonlit gardens toward the sound of cascading water. The Zenith family's private waterfall had always been one of my favorite places at Mount Hua Sect. Secluded, beautiful, and filled with memories that belonged only to Serafina and me. The path wound through carefully maintained gardens where night-blooming flowers released their fragrance into the cool mountain air. As I got closer to the waterfall, I could hear the familiar rush of water over stone, a sound that had provided the soundtrack to so many important moments in our relationship. I rounded the final bend and stopped, my breath catching at the sight waiting for me. Serafina stood at the edge of the main pool, moonlight turning her skin to porcelain and her silver hair to liquid starlight. She was wearing a simple but elegant bikini in ice blue that perfectly complemented her eyes, and she moved with the unconscious grace that had always marked everything she did. "You made it," she said with a smile that held warmth despite her elemental affinity for cold. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, setting down the towel I'd brought and pulling off my shirt. "This place looks exactly the same as it did years ago. Father makes sure it's maintained perfectly," she said, wading into the water with careful steps. "He knows how important it is to our family's history." I followed her into the pool, feeling the familiar shock of mountain cold water against my skin. It was invigorating in a way that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with returning to a place where we discovered so much about ourselves and each other. "Remember when you used to complain that the water was too cold?" Serafina asked with amusement, moving deeper until she was waist-deep in the crystalline pool. "I still think it's too cold," I protested, though I was smiling. "I just stopped complaining about it when I realized you were doing it on purpose." "Me? Manipulating water temperature?" She tried to look innocent, which was difficult to manage when ice crystals were literally forming in the air around her hands. "I would never." "Right?" I said dryly, moving closer to where she stood. "Just like you would never have tried to freeze my feet to the bottom of the pool during that training session." Her laugh was like silver bells in the mountain air. "You deserved that. You were being insufferably smug about mastering the water-walking technique." "I had every right to be smug," I countered, reaching for her hands under the water. It took me 3 weeks to figure out how to maintain stable footing on moving water, and approximately 3 seconds for me to prove that technique had limitations, she said with satisfaction. The memory made me grin despite myself. I'd been so proud of finally managing to stand on the surface of the turbulent pool, right up until Serafina had casually frozen my feet to the stone beneath and left me flailing to maintain balance. You tried to do the same thing to me afterward, she pointed out, moving closer until there was barely any space between us. Tried being the operative word, I admitted. My ice manipulation was terrible back then. Still is, she said teasingly, then yelped in surprise as I splashed water at her in retaliation. What followed was the kind of playful water fight that would have been impossible with anyone else. Serafina's control over ice and water was absolute, but I'd learned over the years how to use my own abilities to counter her advantages. Gray energy could exist in the space between liquid and solid, making her attempts to freeze me less effective than they'd once been. Cheating, she accused as I used gray energy to destabilize the ice projectile she'd launched at my head. Adapting, I corrected, diving under the surface to avoid her next attack. The underwater world of the pool was as beautiful as I remembered, crystal clear water revealing every detail of the stone bottom, with small fish that somehow thrived in the mountain cold darting between carefully placed rocks. I surfaced behind Serafina and wrapped my arms around her waist, lifting her slightly out of the water. Gotcha? I said against her ear, feeling her shiver in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Unfair advantage, she protested, though she was leaning back against my chest rather than trying to escape. You're stronger than you used to be. Everything's different than it used to be, I said more seriously, setting her down but keeping my arms around her. But this, being here with you like this, feels exactly the same. She turned in my arms to face me, her ice blue eyes reflecting depths of emotion that went far beyond simple nostalgia. Do you remember what happened after I froze your feet that day? I thought back to that training session, to the frustration and embarrassment of being so easily outmaneuvered, to the way Serafina had looked both proud of her success and slightly guilty about the trick she'd pulled. You helped me break free from the ice? I said slowly, the memory becoming clearer. And when I complained about unfair tactics, you said I was cheating, she continued with a soft smile. And I said that real combat doesn't have rules about fairness. And then you kissed me. I finished, the memory of that moment suddenly as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. Our first kiss. Spontaneous, awkward, perfect in its complete unexpectedness. Neither of us had planned it, but in the moment after our argument about training tactics, it had felt like the most natural thing in the world. My first kiss, Serafina said quietly, her hands coming up to rest against my chest. I'd been wanting to do it for weeks, but I didn't know how to make it happen. So you used training as an excuse? I said with understanding that came years too late. I used everything as an excuse, she admitted with a laugh that held just a hint of embarrassment. Training, studying, walking through gardens, eating meals together. I kept hoping you'd notice that I was looking for opportunities. I was terrified you'd reject me if I tried anything, I confessed. You were so composed, so perfect at everything. I couldn't imagine someone like you being interested in someone like me. Someone like you, she repeated with gentle incredulity. Arthur, even then you were extraordinary. You just couldn't see it. The conversation had drawn us closer together without either of us really noticing. We were standing in chest-deep water, moonlight playing across the surface around us, with years of shared history creating an intimacy that had nothing to do with physical proximity. Dance with me, Serafina said suddenly, her voice carrying the same slightly hesitant tone she'd used earlier when suggesting the swim. Here? In the water. Here, she confirmed, already beginning to move in slow, graceful patterns that turned the simple act of standing into something approaching art. I followed her lead, letting her guide us in movements that were part dancing, part floating, part something entirely unique to the moment. The water supported us, made every gesture feel weightless and flowing, while the sound of the waterfall provided a rhythm that seemed designed for exactly this kind of intimacy. I love you, Serafina said as we swayed together in the moonlit pool, her voice carrying absolute certainty. I love you too, I replied, meaning it with every part of myself that had learned to love in this very place. She kissed me then, soft and sweet, and full of all the emotion we'd been building toward throughout the evening. It tasted like mountain water and starlight and the promise of moments stolen away from a world that demanded too much of our time and attention. When we finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, I could see my own happiness reflected in her eyes. We should probably head back soon, she said without making any move to actually leave. Probably, I agreed, pulling her closer instead of stepping away. But maybe not quite yet, she added, her lips finding mine again in a kiss that was deeper, more urgent, full of years of love and desire and the simple joy of being together in a place that belonged only to us. The kiss deepened as we pressed closer together, her fingers threading through my hair while mine traced the elegant line of her spine. The world beyond the waterfall seemed to disappear, leaving only the sensation of her skin against mine, the soft sounds she made against my lips, and the way she fit perfectly in my arms like she'd been made for exactly this moment. Time felt suspended, holding us in a bubble of intimacy where nothing existed except the two of us and the love we'd found in this magical place. The waterfall sang around us as we lost ourselves in each other, remembering why this place had always been magic, and why some of the most important things in life were also the simplest. Chapter 864. The Kagu Estate. The next day, it was time for us to travel to the Kagu Estate. Located halfway across the eastern continent, the journey would normally take days of high-speed travel. But the advanced warp gate network connecting major family territories made it possible in minutes. Ready? Serafina asked as we stood before Mount Hua Sek's primary transportation hub. As ready as I can be for walking into what might be a trap, I replied, doing a final check of my equipment. My instincts were telling me this situation was more dangerous than it appeared on the surface. The warp gate activated with a familiar surge of spatial mana, space folding around us as we stepped through the threshold. The sensation lasted only seconds before we emerged onto a platform surrounded by meticulously maintained gardens that spoke to centuries of wealth and refinement. The Kagu Estate sprawled across a valley between two mountain ranges, with traditional architecture blended seamlessly with more modern defensive and communication systems. Everything about the place radiated power, not just magical, but political and economic influence that had shaped the eastern continent for generations. Second Hero and Your Highness, announced the gate attendant with formal courtesy. The matriarch is waiting to receive you. We were escorted through gardens that rivaled anything I'd seen at the Imperial Palace, past fountains and carefully cultivated groves that demonstrated the kind of attention to beauty that only truly secure power could afford. Servants and guards moved with professional efficiency, and I noticed how they all bowed deeply when they saw me, the kind of reverence reserved for figures of truly exceptional status. The main residence was a masterpiece of architectural balance, large enough to house dozens of family members and their retainers, but designed with such elegance that it felt welcoming rather than imposing. We were led through corridors lined with portraits of Kagu ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow our progress with interest. She's waiting in the garden pavilion, our guide explained as we approached an open-air structure that overlooked the estate's most spectacular view. And there she was. Celine Kagu stood with her back to us, gazing out at the mountain vista with the kind of stillness that spoke to deep contemplation. Her white hair caught the morning light like spun silver, falling in elegant waves past her shoulders. When she turned to greet us, violet eyes assessed me with an intelligence that seemed to pierce straight through any pretense. The moment she saw me, she immediately dropped into a formal bow that spoke to genuine respect for my position. Second Hero Arthur Nightingale, she said with reverent formality. It is a tremendous honor to receive you at our family estate. Your presence here during our time of crisis is a blessing beyond measure. I bowed respectfully in return, though something in her manner made me uneasy in ways I couldn't quite identify. Lady Celine, thank you for receiving us during such a difficult time. The honor is entirely ours, she replied, maintaining the careful deference due to someone of my rank. To think that the second hero himself would personally involve himself in our family's troubles. We are truly humbled. She moved closer, and I could feel the subtle pressure of her low radiant rank aura. Controlled, refined, but carrying undertones that seemed somehow different from what I remembered of her previous presence. Your achievements have been the talk of every noble house across all continents. She continued with what appeared to be sincere admiration. When word reached us that you'd become the second hero, I remembered meeting you years ago on southern Seasun Island during that terrible vampire incident. Even then, I could see you possessed extraordinary potential. That was a challenging time, I replied. Your assistance during the crisis was invaluable. I was merely a witness to your heroism, she said with appropriate humility. You were the one who turned the tide of that battle. It's no surprise you've risen to become one of the two greatest heroes in human history. Lady Selene, Serafina interjected with polite formality. We're grateful for your welcome, but we're here primarily about Run. We understand the circumstances of his disappearance were unusual. Of course, Selene replied, her expression shifting to appropriate concern while maintaining her respectful tone. Poor Rin. Please, let's go inside where we can discuss the situation properly with my brother. He's eager to meet the second hero and share everything we know. We were led into a formal meeting room where Kemkagu was already waiting. Ren's father shared the family's distinctive violet eyes, though his hair was darker than his sister's and his build was more clearly martial. The moment he saw me, he rose and bowed deeply, the worry lines around his eyes mixing with obvious awe. Second hero, he said with profound respect. Words cannot express my gratitude that someone of your stature would personally involve yourself in finding my son. The Kago family is forever in your debt. Tell us everything you know, I said as we settled around a low table where tea and documents were already laid out, even details that might seem insignificant. For the next hour, we reviewed everything the Kago family had discovered about Ren's disappearance. The route he'd been taking, the timing of his last confirmed sighting, the complete absence of any signs of struggle or forced departure. It painted a picture that was both frustrating and ominous in its lack of concrete information. What about his mission parameters? Serafina asked with professional focus. Was there anything unusual about the territory he was scouting? Standard border patrol, Kem replied with obvious frustration. Areas he'd covered dozens of times before, with no recent reports of unusual activity or potential threats. The search teams found his vehicle, Selene added, producing photographs that showed an undamaged transport with all systems still functional. No signs of ambush, no evidence of pursuit. As if he simply decided to abandon it and walk away. I studied the images carefully, noting details that supported their assessment. Whatever had happened to Run, it hadn't involved conventional kidnapping or assault methods. We'd like to examine the site personally, I said. Sometimes fresh perspectives can identify things that previous searches missed. Of course, Kem agreed immediately. Whatever the second hero requires, we will provide. I'll give you detailed maps and coordinate with our search teams to ensure you have complete access. If I may be so bold, Selene interjected with careful deference. Might I accompany you to the site? I know those territories well, and perhaps having family present could be helpful if you discover anything significant. The offer was logical and politely made, but it triggered every warning instinct I'd developed over years of navigating dangerous situations. Something about Selene felt wrong, not obviously so, but in subtle ways that made me want to keep her where I could observe her rather than allowing her to operate independently. That would be helpful, I replied with careful neutrality. Your local knowledge could be valuable. 2 hours later, we were airborne in one of the Kago family's high-speed aircraft, heading toward the region where Run had vanished. Selene had changed into practical traveling clothes that didn't diminish her elegance, and she seemed genuinely concerned about finding her nephew. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something about her was fundamentally wrong. The search site was exactly as described, a stretch of relatively open terrain near the border between Kagolands and neutral territories. Ren's vehicle sat where the search teams had found it, preserved as evidence but yielding no additional clues to conventional investigation. The search teams covered a 5-kilometer radius, Kem explained as we stood beside the abandoned transport. Ground teams, aerial reconnaissance, even magical detection specialists. Nothing. I activated my enhanced senses, pushing my perception beyond normal human limits to scan for traces that others might have missed. The gray had sharpened my understanding of how energy flowed through living systems, making me more sensitive to disturbances in natural patterns. For several minutes, I found nothing that hadn't already been cataloged by the search teams. Then, at the very edge of my enhanced range, I detected something that made my blood run cold. A trace of energy that felt familiar in the worst possible way. "Arthur," Serafina asked, noting my sudden tension. "What is it?" I moved toward the source of the disturbance, following a trail that was barely perceptible even with my enhanced capabilities. The energy signature grew stronger as I approached a seemingly unremarkable section of grassland about 200 meters from the vehicle. "Here," I said quietly, kneeling to examine the ground more closely. This was a sickening energy I was all too familiar with. The power of a calamity. Chapter 865. Beyond 9-Star 1. "Here," I said quietly, kneeling to examine the ground more closely. This was a sickening energy I was all too familiar with. The power of a calamity. But not just any calamity. As I focused my enhanced senses on the lingering traces, the specific signature became unmistakable. The twisted malevolence, the crushing weight of powerful miasma, the particular resonance that had haunted my nightmares for months after our first encounter. The heavenly demon. "Arthur." Serafina's voice carried sharp concern as she noticed my expression. "What is it?" I stood up slowly, my mind racing through possibilities that didn't make sense. "This energy, it's from the heavenly demon." "That's impossible," Serafina said immediately. "You killed Gideon months ago." "I destroyed the body aspect," I corrected grimly, staring at the ground where traces of that familiar malice still lingered. "But the heavenly demon exists as 3 separate aspects: body, mind, and soul. The mind and soul aspects should be contained within Jack's consciousness." "Should be?" Celine asked, moving closer with what appeared to be genuine confusion. "You mean they might not be?" I extended my senses deeper into the lingering energy traces, searching for any signature that might belong to Jack. His presence had always carried a distinctive flavor, determination mixed with barely controlled fury, the specific resonance of someone who'd spent years fighting against the corruption trying to consume him from within. But this energy carried none of Jack's characteristics. "This isn't Jack's energy," I said with growing alarm. "This is pure heavenly demon essence, but it's not coming from either of the aspects I know about." "Could there be more divisions of the aspects than you originally thought?" Kem suggested with the kind of careful hope that came from grasping at any possibility that might explain his son's disappearance. "Maybe," I admitted, though the idea made my stomach clench with dread. "Or maybe something has changed about the aspects that were supposed to be contained." The trail of dimensional energy was growing fainter with each passing hour, but it was still detectable if I focused completely on following its path. Whatever had created the spatial distortion that took Rin, it had left just enough residual signature for someone with my capabilities to track. "We need to follow this," I said with grim determination, "before the trail disappears completely." "Is that safe?" Celine asked with what seemed like appropriate concern. "If we're dealing with calamity-level entities." "Nothing about this situation is safe," I replied honestly. "But Run is out there somewhere, and this is our only lead to finding him." We spent the next 2 hours following the fading trail across increasingly desolate terrain. The energy signature led us away from the main roads and established paths, into wilderness areas that felt somehow wrong in ways I couldn't immediately identify. The landscape itself seemed subtly corrupted, not obviously so, but plants grew in patterns that defied natural order, water sources carried undertones that made my enhanced senses recoil, and the very air felt thick with malevolent presence. "This place feels diseased," Serafina observed as we climbed a rocky outcropping that offered a better view of the surrounding area. "Tainted?" I agreed, noting how even the stone beneath our feet carried traces of the same miasma we'd been tracking. Whatever happened here, it's been affecting the environment for some time. Months? Kem asked with growing dread. Maybe longer, I replied, studying the extent of the corruption. This level of environmental contamination takes time to develop. The trail led us to what appeared to be a natural amphitheater, a circular depression in the landscape surrounded by jagged rocks that formed an almost perfect ring. But as we approached the center of the formation, I could feel dimensional energy growing stronger rather than weaker. Here, I said, stopping at what seemed to be an unremarkable patch of ground. This is where the trail ends. I don't see anything, Celine said, studying the area with obvious confusion. Neither do I admitted, kneeling again to examine the space where the energy signature was strongest. But something is definitely here. I placed my hands against the ground and let gray energy flow through my palms, using it to probe the dimensional fabric that overlay normal reality. For several moments, nothing happened. Then, gradually, I began to sense something that shouldn't have been possible. There's a gap, I said with growing amazement. A tear in dimensional space that's been concealed somehow. Can you open it? Serafina asked. I think so, I replied, though I wasn't certain what we might find on the other side. But we have no idea what we'll be walking into. Ren could be in there, Kem said with desperate hope. If there's any chance of finding him. I nodded with understanding, then began the delicate process of using gray energy to widen the dimensional tear. It was incredibly difficult work. Whatever force had created this hidden gateway had also put significant effort into keeping it sealed. Gray energy flowed through my hands in carefully controlled patterns, finding the spaces between stable reality and whatever lay beyond. Slowly, painfully, the concealed opening began to reveal itself. What emerged was unlike anything I'd ever seen. A portal of sorts, but not the clean geometrical openings created by warp gates or standard dimensional magic. This was something organic, pulsing, with edges that seemed to writhe like living tissue. The energy radiating from beyond the opening was overwhelming. Not just powerful, but wrong in ways that made my enhanced senses scream warnings. Arthur, Serafina said with growing alarm. Maybe we should. Her words were cut off as the portal suddenly expanded, no longer under my control. What had been a carefully opened gateway became a hungry void that began pulling everything nearby toward its depths. Grab onto something, I shouted, but it was too late. The suction was too strong, too sudden. I felt my feet leave the ground as the portal's pull overwhelmed gravity itself. Serafina's hand found mine just before we were both drawn inexorably toward the writhing opening. The last thing I saw before we crossed the threshold was Celine and Kem staring after us with expressions of shock and horror, too far away to be caught by the portal's influence. Then reality twisted around us, and we were falling through dimensional space that felt like being turned inside out while drowning in cosmic horror. We emerged on the other side with bone-jarring impact, tumbling across ground that felt wrong beneath us. The air was thick and oppressive, carrying scents that shouldn't exist and sounds that hurt to hear. I helped Serafina to her feet, both of us looking around at our surroundings with growing disbelief. We stood in what appeared to be a vast underground chamber, but the architecture was unlike anything from Earth's civilizations. The walls curved impossibly, covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Crystalline formations jutted from floor and ceiling, pulsing with sickly light that revealed more details than I wanted to see. And everywhere, permeating everything, was the overwhelming presence of power that transcended normal classification. Arthur, Serafina said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of careful control that meant she was fighting not to panic. What is this place? I extended my enhanced senses, trying to understand the nature of whatever we'd stumbled into. The energy signatures were staggering, not just powerful, but operating on scales that made calamity-level threats seem manageable by comparison. This is a dungeon, I said slowly, as understanding dawned with sickening clarity. But not a normal one. What do you mean? She asked, though something in her voice suggested she already suspected the answer. I looked around at the impossible architecture, at the crystalline formations that pulsed with power beyond mortal comprehension, at the very air that seemed thick with malevolent intelligence. "This is a dungeon far beyond 9-star classification," I said with grim certainty. "We're looking at something that shouldn't exist on Earth." Chapter 866. Beyond 9-star 2. The dungeon stretched out before us like something from a nightmare designed by a mad architect. Every surface seemed to pulse with its own malevolent life, and the air itself felt heavy with ancient power that made breathing difficult. But we had a job to do, and somewhere in this impossible place, Ren was waiting to be found. "Stay close," I told Serafina as we began moving deeper into the twisted corridors. "Everything about this place feels wrong. I don't want us getting separated." "Agreed," she replied, ice crystals forming unconsciously around her hands as her body responded to the oppressive atmosphere. "Can you sense anything? Any trace of Ren?" I extended my enhanced senses, pushing through the overwhelming background radiation of whatever power had created this place. It was like trying to hear a whisper during a thunderstorm, but gradually I began to pick out something that felt more familiar. "This way," I said, turning toward what seemed to be a main corridor that sloped downward into the depths of the structure. "There's someone, deeper in." We walked in relative silence for several minutes, both of us trying to process what we'd stumbled into. The architecture around us was definitely not human in origin, but it wasn't completely alien either. There was something familiar about the design principles, as if it had been built by someone who understood human sensibilities but had access to construction techniques that transcended normal physics. "Arthur," Serafina said quietly as we passed another section of those painful crystalline formations. "What do you think the chances are that we're going to be able to get out of here?" I considered the question seriously. The portal we'd come through had closed behind us, and I hadn't sensed any obvious exit routes during our exploration so far. But I'd been in seemingly impossible situations before. "We'll find a way," I said with more confidence than I felt. "We always do." "That's not really an answer." "It's the only answer I've got right now," I admitted. "But first we find Ren, then we figure out how to get all three of us home." The corridor opened up into a vast chamber that defied architectural logic. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, disappearing into shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. But what caught my attention wasn't the impossible space. It was the sound echoing through the chamber, the rhythmic impact of flesh against stone, repeated over and over with mechanical precision. "Training," Serafina said with recognition. "Someone's training in here." We followed the sound across the chamber toward what appeared to be a raised platform in the center of the space. As we got closer, the details became clearer, and I felt relief flood through me as I recognized the figure moving through combat forms. Renkagu stood in the center of the platform, his fists moving in patterns that spoke to years of martial arts training. But something was different about him. His normally dark hair had turned completely white, and when he paused in his routine to wipe sweat from his brow, I could see that his eyes now carried a purple hue that matched his family's traditional coloring. "Ren!" I called out, not caring if our presence might alert any other inhabitants of this place. He spun toward us with reflexes that were noticeably faster than I remembered, his stance automatically shifting into a defensive position before recognition dawned on his face. "Arthur? Serafina?" He stared at us with genuine shock. "What are you doing here? How did you even find this place?" "Looking for you," Serafina said with obvious relief as we climbed onto the platform. "Your family has been worried sick. You've been missing for 3 days." 3 days? Ren's eyebrows rose with surprise. "It feels like I've been here for weeks." I studied him more carefully, noting changes that went beyond just his hair and eye color. He moved with improved coordination. His stance showed subtle refinements that spoke to intensive training, and there was something in his overall presence that suggested significant growth in power. "Ran," I said carefully. "What happened to you? How did you end up here?" He ran a hand through his newly white hair with a gesture that seemed unconscious. "Honestly, I'm still not entirely sure. I was on routine patrol, checking the border territories like I'd done dozens of times before. I stopped to investigate what looked like unusual energy readings, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in this place. Just like that? Serafina asked. No memory of being transported. No sign of who or what brought you here. Nothing, Rin confirmed with obvious frustration. One moment I was standing beside my vehicle. The next I was lying on the floor of this chamber with no idea how I'd gotten here. And you've been here alone this entire time? I asked, looking around at the impossible architecture that surrounded us. Completely alone, he said, but not inactive. This place, it's incredible, Arthur. I know it looks terrifying and wrong, but there's something here that's beyond anything I've ever experienced. What do you mean? Serafina asked with growing concern. Rin gestured toward the platform where he'd been training, and I noticed for the first time that the stone surface was covered with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move when observed directly. Training arrays, he explained with excitement that overrode his usual caution. But not just any training arrays. These are designed to push someone beyond their normal limits, to help them achieve breakthroughs that would normally take years of intensive cultivation. I studied the patterns more carefully, recognizing elements that reminded me of advanced magical theory but implemented in ways I'd never seen before. How do they work? I'm not entirely sure of the mechanics, Rin admitted, but when I train on these platforms, everything becomes more intense. My reflexes improve, my strength increases, my understanding of combat principles deepens. It's like the arrays are designed to accelerate development in every possible way. And you've just been training this entire time? Serafina asked with something between admiration and concern. What else was I supposed to do? Rin replied with a slight smile. I was trapped in an impossible place with no obvious way out, but surrounded by training resources that any martial artist would kill for. So I decided to make the most of it. The pragmatic approach was very much in character for Rin, but I was more concerned about the larger implications of what we'd discovered. Rin, I said seriously. This isn't just a random dungeon or training facility. The power signatures here are off the charts. We're talking about something that operates on scales beyond normal classification. I know, he replied with surprising calm. I figured that out pretty quickly. But Arthur, I also figured out something else. Something that explains why this place exists and why it's here, near our family's territory. What? Both Serafina and I asked simultaneously. Rin walked to the edge of the platform and gestured toward the chamber walls, where I now noticed additional patterns carved into the impossible stone. Those aren't just decorative, he said with growing excitement. They're historical records. And if I'm reading them correctly, this place was created by the first hero. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Liam Kagu? Your ancestor. The same, Rin confirmed with obvious pride. This is his inheritance, Arthur. A training facility designed to prepare future generations for threats that normal human development couldn't handle. I stared around the chamber with new understanding. Liam Kagu, the legendary hero who defeated the heavenly demon and nearly eliminated the vampire species 2 centuries ago. If this place was his creation. But why here? Serafina asked. Why hidden in such an inaccessible location? Because, Rin said with growing seriousness. According to those records, Liam knew that the threats he'd faced weren't permanently eliminated. This facility was his preparation for whoever would need to face them again. The heavenly demon, I said with grim understanding. Among other things, Rin confirmed. The records suggest he was preparing for multiple potential crises, not just demonic threats. I processed this information while studying the training arrays and historical records that surrounded us. An inheritance from the first hero, designed to prepare future generations for cosmic-level threats. It explained why the place felt so powerful, but it also raised new questions. Ran, I said carefully. If this place has been hidden for 2 centuries, what triggered its activation now? And how did you specifically end up here? His expression grew more thoughtful. I've been wondering about that myself, but based on what I've learned from the training systems, I think this place has been monitoring potential candidates. looking for someone from the Kagu bloodline who might be capable of handling whatever Liam was preparing for. And it chose you, Serafina observed. Apparently, Ren said with a mixture of pride and concern. Though I'm not sure I'm worthy of that kind of trust. You're stronger, I pointed out, noting the obvious improvements in his presence and bearing. Much stronger, he agreed. But Arthur, I don't think this training is finished. I think there's more here that I need to learn, more preparation that needs to happen before. Before what? Ren looked around the chamber with an expression that combined determination and dread. Before whatever Liam was preparing for actually arrives. Chapter 867. The First Hero's Final Legacy. Show me these records, I said, following Ren toward the chamber walls where the historical inscriptions were carved into the impossible stone. As we approached, the patterns began to glow with soft light that made the symbols easier to read. But these weren't written in any normal script. They were carved in a combination of ancient text and magical notation that seemed to convey meaning directly into our minds rather than requiring normal reading comprehension. Here, Ren said, pointing to a section that pulsed with brighter illumination. This is where it explains how the facility was created. I pressed my hand against the carved symbols and felt knowledge flow into my consciousness like water breaking through a dam. Images, sensations, and understanding that belonged to someone else flooded through my awareness, showing me events that had taken place 2 centuries ago. Liam Kagu stood atop a mountain peak, his fists wreathed in spatial distortions as he faced the writhing mass of corruption that was the heavenly demon. The first calamity had been a being of immense power, its influence spreading across continents and threatening to consume all of human civilization. The battle had raged for days, with Liam's combination of fist-fighting and space-time magic matching the demon's raw destructive power. His eyes glowed with the distinctive purple light of the god's eyes, the Kagu family's bloodline ability that allowed perfect perception and analysis of magical phenomena. Time dilated around his strikes as he compressed seconds into microseconds, allowing him to land dozens of blows in moments. Space folded to his will, letting him appear behind the demon even as it tried to retreat. Gravity amplified his attacks, each punch carrying the weight of collapsing stars. He was high radiant rank, I said with growing understanding. Stronger than Gideon, but still within normal power classifications. But watch what happens next, Ren replied with grim intensity. The carved symbols pulsed with new information, showing me the moment when Liam realized victory would cost him his life. The heavenly demon's corruption had spread too far through his body during their extended battle. Even as he landed the killing blow, he was dying. But worse than his own death was what he witnessed in the demon's final moments. As the heavenly demon's physical form dissolved under his space-enhanced fist strikes, Liam's god's eyes revealed something horrifying. The entity wasn't truly dying. Instead, it was fragmenting itself, dividing its essence into separate aspects that scattered in different directions. He saw it splitting apart, Serafina said with awe as she touched another section of the wall. Mind, body, and soul, 3 distinct pieces of the original calamity. The implications were staggering. Liam hadn't just faced a powerful enemy. He confronted a being whose nature made permanent victory nearly impossible. The heavenly demon could be defeated, but its fundamental essence would always seek to reunify. So in his final moments, he made a choice. I realized as more understanding flowed through the carved records. Instead of simply dying, he used his remaining life force and spatial magic to create this place. The knowledge showed me Liam's final technique, a combination of space-time manipulation and his own life essence that created stable dimensional anchor points. Using his mastery over spatial magic, he had folded reality around his dying moments, creating a pocket dimension that could exist outside normal time flow. This entire facility exists in compressed space-time, Ren said with growing excitement. Powered by Liam's final use of his spatial magic and sustained by the dimensional techniques he developed. I moved to another section of the wall where the symbols seemed to resonate with my own spatial abilities. When I made contact, a flood of information hit me about Liam's space-time magic techniques. The records showed me how Liam had developed methods that seamlessly blended martial arts with space-time manipulation. His punches could strike across folded space, his defensive movements could redirect attacks through temporal shifts, and his footwork could manipulate gravity to enhance mobility. His fist unity, I said as the knowledge crystallized. He achieved perfect integration between his fighting style and his spatial magic, like my sword unity, but focused on hand-to-hand combat. But what made him truly formidable was the combination of these techniques with his bloodline gift. The god's eyes weren't just enhanced vision. They were a complete magical analysis system that could perceive the fundamental structure of any magical phenomenon, exclusive to the Kagu bloodline. The training platforms, I realized, studying the knowledge transfer systems with new understanding. They're designed to teach Liam's space-time magic methods. And for you, Ren, they can help develop the god's eyes since you have the bloodline. Not just teach, Ren corrected with appreciation for his ancestors' foresight. They provide direct experience of how those abilities should function. Compressed learning that would normally take decades. I studied another section of the records that dealt with the threats Liam had foreseen. The fragments showed creatures and entities that operated on scales similar to the heavenly demon. Demons whose power could corrupt entire continents. Beings whose influence transcended normal reality. He wasn't just preparing for the heavenly demon's return, Seraphina observed. He was preparing for the larger demonic forces that the Calamity's resurrection would herald. The weight of that revelation settled over us. The heavenly demon wasn't an isolated threat. It was the vanguard of something larger. Its return would signal the beginning of conflicts involving entities that required space-time magic and enhanced perception just to comprehend, let alone fight. The god's eyes will be crucial for Run, I said, studying the techniques Liam had developed, for understanding threats that operate beyond normal magical theory. And his space-time magic methods will help all of us. The bloodline inheritance is mine to claim, Ren said with growing understanding of his responsibility. But the space-time magic techniques can benefit everyone. I looked at the training platforms with new appreciation. These weren't just knowledge transfer systems. They were direct inheritance of the Kagu family's most advanced techniques, preserved in the moments before the first hero's death. How long do you think we have? Seraphina asked. Before the threats he was preparing for actually arrive? Not long enough, I replied, though I couldn't shake the feeling that Ren being brought here now meant the countdown had already begun. The facility activated for a reason. Something must have triggered its detection systems. Then we'd better start learning, Ren said with determination. If Liam thought these techniques were necessary for facing demons, then we need to master everything he left behind. I nodded with agreement, feeling anticipation for what we might discover. Advanced space-time magic and fist unity methods for me, while Ren could access both those techniques and the God's Eye's bloodline inheritance that was his birthright. But more than techniques, we had the opportunity to understand what it meant to face cosmic-level threats with preparation and wisdom rather than just raw power. The first hero's legacy was waiting, and it was time to prove worthy of the knowledge he'd preserved for us. Chapter 868, Mastering Time, Space, and Gravity. The first time I stepped onto one of Liam's training platforms, the experience nearly overwhelmed me completely. The moment my feet made contact with the carved stone, knowledge crashed into my consciousness like a tsunami of understanding. Not just information, actual experience, muscle memory, instinctive responses that belonged to someone who had spent decades mastering every aspect of combat and magical theory. I staggered, barely maintaining my balance as Liam Kagu's memories flooded through my awareness. The sensation was indescribable, like suddenly having access to a lifetime of experiences that weren't my own, understanding techniques I'd never practiced, feeling the weight of decisions I'd never made. Arthur, Seraphina's voice reached me through the torrent of inherited knowledge. Are you all right? I paused, trying to process what was happening to me. I'm experiencing his memories, not just learning about his techniques, actually experiencing what it felt like to use them. The platform pulsed with increased intensity, and suddenly I could see the chamber as Liam had seen it during its construction. The impossible architecture hadn't been built. It had been manifested through the application of space-time manipulation that operated on scales I could barely comprehend. Liam's understanding of space-time magic made my own attempts look primitive by comparison. Where I struggled to balance opposing forces, he had achieved perfect harmony between spatial manipulation, temporal control, and gravitational effects. His techniques didn't just manipulate these forces, they integrated them into seamless combinations that made the impossible seem routine. The scale of his technique refinement, I said with growing awe, is beyond anything I imagined possible. Through the inherited memories, I could feel what it had been like to wield high radiant rank power with perfect technical control. Not just the raw strength, but the precision that came with decades of refining space-time magic until every application was effortless. The platform shifted, and suddenly I was experiencing one of Liam's training sessions from his peak period. The sensation was so vivid that for a moment I forgot where I really was, completely absorbed in the memory of practicing techniques that transcended normal space-time magic. Space folded around Liam's will, distances becoming meaningless as he moved between locations without crossing the intervening ground. Time dilated and compressed according to his intentions, allowing him to experience hours of subjective time in moments of real duration. Gravity became a tool for enhancing every movement, responding to his desires with precision that made the impossible seem routine. "This is what advanced space-time magic looks like," I whispered, understanding flooding through me as I experienced techniques that went far beyond my current abilities. Perfect integration of all three fundamental forces. The memory shifted to show me Liam's battle against the heavenly demon, and I finally understood why that conflict had required such sacrifice. The heavenly demon at full power hadn't just been strong. It had been an entity whose corrupted nature made it incredibly difficult to defeat permanently. I watched through Liam's eyes as the demon's unified form wielded power that rivaled his own high radiant rank capabilities. The entity possessed regenerative abilities that let it recover from devastating attacks, reality-warping techniques that could alter the battlefield itself, and most dangerously, corruption that spread to anything it touched for extended periods. The battle had been as much about endurance and tactical thinking as raw power. Liam's space-time magic had given him the tools to match the demon's capabilities, but victory had required sacrificing his life to land the final blow before the corruption consumed him completely. "The techniques," I said as new understanding crystallized in my consciousness. "They're not just about becoming stronger. They're about developing the wisdom to use strength responsibly." The platform responded to my growing comprehension by revealing deeper layers of Liam's knowledge. I found myself experiencing his struggles with the temptations that came with divine rank power, the constant choice between using his capabilities for personal benefit versus cosmic responsibility. Divine rank beings didn't just have the power to reshape reality. They had the responsibility to ensure that their reshaping served the greater good rather than their own desires. Every action rippled across scales that affected countless lives, making ethical considerations more complex than anything faced at lower power levels. But beyond the technical aspects, Liam's memories showed me practical applications that revolutionized my understanding of what space-time magic could accomplish. I watched him create pocket dimensions not through brute force manipulation of space-time, but by finding natural weak points in dimensional barriers and carefully expanding them. He demonstrated time manipulation that didn't violate causality but instead worked within cosmic laws to achieve effects that appeared impossible. Most remarkably, he showed me how gravity could be used not just as a tool for combat or transportation, but as a means of achieving perfect balance in all applications of power. Gravity wasn't just a force. It was the universe's method for maintaining equilibrium, and understanding that principle was key to wielding any ability without causing unintended consequences. "Show me," I said to the platform, feeling ready to attempt some of the space-time techniques I'd experienced through Liam's memories. The response was immediate. Knowledge flowed into my hands as I began practicing the space manipulation techniques that Liam had perfected. Instead of forcing reality to bend to my will through gray energy, I learned to find the natural flex points where space was already unstable and gently encourage it to adopt the configuration I desired using more conventional spatial magic. The difference was remarkable. Where my previous attempts at spatial manipulation had relied heavily on gray energy's unique properties, Liam's methods achieved similar effects through refined understanding of how space-time naturally behaved. It wasn't about overwhelming reality. It was about understanding reality well enough to work with it rather than against it. Arthur called from another platform where he was practicing combat forms that incorporated his newly white hair into complex defensive patterns. "What exactly are you doing over there?" "Learning to manipulate space properly," I replied, successfully creating a small pocket dimension that could hold objects in suspended animation. Turns out I've been approaching it completely wrong. Time manipulation proved even more challenging. Liam's memories showed me techniques for creating temporal bubbles where different rates of time flow could coexist, but the precision required was staggering. A single miscalculation could create paradoxes that would unravel causality across vast regions. I managed to create a small area where time moved at half its normal rate, then gradually learned to adjust the ratio with increasing precision. The sensation was strange, watching the world outside the bubble move in slow motion while experiencing normal time within the affected area. "Incredible," Serafina said, observing my progress from her own training platform. "You're achieving effects that should require years of development." "Liam's knowledge," I explained, expanding the temporal bubble to include both of them. "I'm not just learning new techniques. I'm inheriting understanding that took him decades to develop." The gravity manipulation proved most intuitive, probably because it related most closely to my existing understanding of gray energy's balance principles. Liam's memories showed me how gravitational fields could be shaped not just to move objects, but to create zones of perfect stability where other forces could operate without interference. I practiced creating gravity wells that could contain explosive effects, gravitational fields that enhanced precision rather than just providing force, and most remarkably, techniques that used gravity to harmonize conflicting magical energies. This is how high-level Radiant rank fighters maintain control. I realized as I successfully demonstrated a technique that used gravitational fields to balance opposing magical forces. Not through raw power, but through perfect understanding of how different forces interact. Hours passed in intensive practice as I absorbed more of Liam's knowledge and learned to apply it through my own capabilities, integrating his space-time magic techniques with my unique gray energy. The platform seemed to adjust its teaching methods to my learning style, providing exactly the right combination of theory and practical experience to maximize my development. But perhaps most importantly, I began to understand what Liam had meant about the responsibility that came with great power. Every technique he developed included safeguards and limitations designed to prevent unintended consequences. High Radiant rank power wasn't just about capability, it was about the wisdom to know when and how that capability should be used. As I practiced a particularly complex space-time manipulation that created a stable portal between distant locations, I felt something fundamental shift in my understanding of my own potential. I wasn't just becoming stronger. I was learning what it meant to be worthy of the strength I sought. And somewhere in the depths of the inherited memories, I could sense Liam's approval of the progress I was making. Chapter 869, Mastering of Fundamentals. Days blended together in Liam's training facility as we pushed ourselves beyond what we thought possible. The knowledge inheritance from the platforms was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, absorbing decades of refined technique and understanding in hours of intensive practice. My space manipulation had improved dramatically from what it had been before. Where I'd once created functional but crude spatial tiers, I now learned Liam's methods for finding natural weak points in dimensional barriers and working with them instead of forcing my way through. "The efficiency difference is incredible," I said, creating a stable portal between 2 points in the chamber that used half the energy my previous methods required. Same result, much cleaner execution. The techniques Liam had developed were refinements of abilities I already possessed, but his 2 centuries of experience showed me applications I'd never considered. Instead of just teleporting or creating spatial storage, I could now fold space in complex patterns that allowed for tactical advantages I'd never imagined. Time manipulation was where I saw the most improvement. My previous attempts had been functional but limited, basic acceleration and deceleration effects that were useful but not particularly sophisticated. Liam's methods showed me how to create temporal bubbles with precise control over the rate differentials. Watch this, I said, creating a zone where time moved at exactly half speed while maintaining perfect stability at the boundaries. No energy bleeding, no temporal distortions. Just clean, controlled time manipulation. The key was treating temporal fields like any other magical construct, something that required precision and understanding rather than brute force. Liam's memories showed me how to weave time effects that were stable, sustainable, and didn't create the headaches that had plagued my earlier attempts. Gravity magic saw similar improvements. I'd always been decent with gravitational effects, but Liam's techniques showed me applications that went far beyond simple attraction and repulsion. Gravity could be shaped, layered, and used to create zones of perfect balance where other magical effects operated more efficiently. This is incredible, I said as I practiced one of Liam's advanced techniques that layered multiple gravitational fields in complex interference patterns. He could create gravity wells that pulled opponents into the exact trajectory needed for follow-up attacks, while simultaneously using counter-rotating fields to destabilize their defensive positioning. The combination of improved space, time, and gravity magic with my existing gray energy created possibilities I was only beginning to explore. Gray energy's unique properties for existing between opposing states worked incredibly well with Liam's refined techniques for manipulating fundamental forces. Arthur, Serafina called from her own training platform, how much improvement are you actually seeing? Significant, I replied honestly. Not learning new abilities, just getting much better at using the ones I already have. What about you? Serafina had been focusing on her ice magic, working with knowledge from the platforms that showed her applications she'd never considered. Her ice crystal jade body was responding to the training in ways that suggested she was approaching some kind of breakthrough. My control has improved dramatically, she said, creating ice formations that held complex internal structures. But more than that, I'm starting to understand what ice magic actually represents. She demonstrated by creating a crystalline matrix that could store and redirect magical energy with perfect efficiency. The ice wasn't just frozen water. It was a medium for imposing order and structure on chaotic magical forces. Ice is about preservation and organization, she continued, her eyes bright with new understanding. Every crystal formation is a way of taking random molecular motion and organizing it into perfect patterns. The implications were fascinating. Where my improvements focused on refining techniques I already knew, Serafina was discovering entirely new ways to think about her elemental affinity. Her ice magic was evolving beyond simple temperature control into something approaching structural manipulation. I can feel my ice crystal jade body changing, she said, frost patterns spreading across her skin in response to her heightened emotional state, like it's preparing for something more significant than just enhanced ice magic. I watched her work through increasingly complex ice formations, noting how her power signature was fluctuating in ways that reminded me of advancement preparation. The training platforms seemed to be guiding her toward some kind of breakthrough that would fundamentally change her capabilities. Breakthrough preparation? I asked, recognizing the signs from my own experience with rank advancement. I think so, she replied with growing excitement. Everything I'm learning here feels like it's building toward something. Like all these new techniques are just the foundation for a much larger change. The platform beneath her feet was responding to her increased power output with enhanced training scenarios. Instead of just providing knowledge, it was beginning to challenge her with practical applications that pushed her developing abilities to their limits. The facility recognizes when someone is ready for advancement, I observed, noting how the chamber's ambient energy was shifting to support her development. It's preparing specialized training for your breakthrough attempt. Good, she said with determination. I can feel my potential straining against current limitations. Whatever change is coming, I'm ready for it. While Serafina worked toward her breakthrough, Run had been focusing on his own development path. His training concentrated on integrating the God's Eyes bloodline ability with Liam's fist-fighting techniques and space-time magic. The God's Eyes are responding to the training, he called from across the chamber, his violet-tinged gaze analyzing magical phenomena with increasing clarity. I can perceive details about magical structures that I never noticed before. His white hair seemed to glow slightly as he activated his bloodline ability, the distinctive Kagu family gift allowing him to analyze and understand magical effects with supernatural precision. Combined with the space-time magic techniques he was learning from Liam's inheritance, it was creating a combat style that would be incredibly effective against magical opponents. "Show me," I said, curious to see how his capabilities were developing. Ren moved through a complex combat form that seamlessly integrated enhanced perception with spatial magic. His god's eyes tracked multiple magical effects simultaneously, while his fists manipulated space to strike from unexpected angles. Time dilation around his movements made him appear to accelerate and decelerate unpredictably. "Impressive," Serafina said with genuine admiration. "You're developing a fighting style that would be nearly impossible to counter without similar capabilities." "That's the idea," Ren replied with satisfaction. Liam's techniques were designed to give the Kagu family advantages that couldn't be replicated by other bloodlines. The combination of his inherited god's eyes, learned space-time magic, and improving physical capabilities was creating something that reminded me of Liam's own combat effectiveness. Not identical, Ren was developing his own style, but clearly influenced by the same principles that had made the first hero so formidable. "I think I'm approaching my own breakthrough point," he said after completing his training routine. "The bloodline awakening combined with everything I'm learning here. It feels like my body is preparing for significant advancement." Both of my companions were showing signs of impending rank advancement, while my own improvements focused on refining abilities I already possessed. It was exactly what this facility had been designed for, preparing individuals to face threats that required capabilities beyond normal human limitations. "We should coordinate our advancement attempts," I suggested, noting how the training platforms were beginning to reconfigure themselves for breakthrough support. "If both of you are going to attempt Radiant rank breakthroughs, having backup available could be important." "Agreed," Serafina said with practical concern. "Rank advancement always carries risks, especially when attempting to jump from Immortal to Radiant level. Then let's make sure we're as prepared as possible," Ren added with characteristic determination. Liam didn't preserve all this knowledge just for us to waste the opportunity through poor planning. The next phase of our training was about to begin, and with it, the chance for my companions to achieve the kind of power that would be necessary for facing the threats this facility had been designed to prepare us for. The real test was approaching, and we were going to be ready for it. Chapter 870, Radiant Ascension. Serafina's breakthrough attempt began the next morning. She stood at the center of one of the specialized platforms, her sword drawn and held in a perfect ready position. The blade gleamed with frost patterns that seemed to shift and flow in response to her breathing. "I can feel it," she said quietly, her ice-blue eyes focused on something beyond the physical chamber. "The connection I've been missing." I watched from a safe distance as she began moving through sword forms that integrated her ice magic in ways I'd never seen before. Each strike left trails of crystalline energy that didn't dissipate but instead formed complex patterns in the air around her. "She's close," Ren observed, his god's eyes tracking the magical flows surrounding Serafina's practice. "Her mana signature is shifting towards something completely different." The breakthrough platform responded to her developing unity by providing increasingly challenging scenarios. Magical constructs appeared that forced her to adapt her techniques in real time, pushing her understanding of how sword and ice magic could work together. "There," she said suddenly, her voice carrying new certainty. "I see it now." Her next sword strike created a wave of ice that moved with perfect precision, following the exact path her blade had traced through the air. But more than that, the ice responded to her sword intent rather than just her magical will. The blade and magic had become extensions of the same fundamental technique. "Sword unity," I said with recognition and pride. "You've achieved sword unity." The moment she acknowledged the unity, everything changed. Her mana signature exploded outward as the breakthrough to Radiant rank began in earnest. The platform beneath her feet glowed with increasing intensity as it provided support for the transformation. Ice and sword technique merged into something that transcended both individual components. Her blade strikes could now create ice effects that followed sword logic rather than magical theory, while her ice magic gained the precision and intent that marked true swordsmanship. "The barrier," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there moments before. "I can feel it dissolving." Power flowed through her in waves that made the entire chamber respond with approval. Her ice crystal jade body enhancement evolved in real time, becoming something that enhanced both her physical swordsmanship and her magical ice techniques without distinction between the two. When the breakthrough completed, Seraphina opened eyes that now carried the distinctive depth of Radiant Rank awareness. She moved with fluid grace that integrated perfect sword technique with supernatural ice magic control. "How does it feel?" I asked, noting how her presence now carried the unmistakable weight of someone operating on fundamentally different power scales. "Like I finally understand what I've been trying to achieve for years," she replied, creating an ice blade that formed directly from her sword intent rather than requiring separate magical casting. She demonstrated by moving through a complex kata that left intricate ice formations in the air, each one perfectly aligned with the sword techniques that had created them. The precision was remarkable, showing control that would have been impossible without the unity breakthrough. "My turn," Ren said with determination, moving to another breakthrough platform. His preparation was different from Seraphina's. Where she had focused on integrating sword and magic, Ren's path involved achieving perfect harmony between his enhanced physical capabilities and his space-time magic. "Fist unity," he said, settling into a combat stance that somehow incorporated spatial awareness into basic positioning. "Grandfather's techniques are finally making sense." I watched as he began working through combat forms that seamlessly blended martial arts with his developing magical abilities. His god's eyes tracked spatial distortions while his fists manipulated gravity and time in ways that enhanced rather than replaced pure fighting technique. "The key is treating magic as extension of physical technique," he said, landing a punch that folded space around the impact point. "Not using magic to supplement fighting, but making fighting and magic the same action." The breakthrough platform responded to his developing understanding by creating increasingly complex combat scenarios. Magical constructs attacked from multiple directions while environmental hazards forced him to adapt his space-time magic in real time. "There," Ren said suddenly, his white hair beginning to glow with purple energy. "Perfect integration." His next combination demonstrated true fist unity, a series of strikes that manipulated space, time, and gravity not through separate magical casting, but as natural expressions of his martial intent. Each punch carried spatial distortion. Every defensive movement created temporal effects. "Fist unity achieved," I confirmed, recognizing the distinctive integration of physical and magical technique. The moment he acknowledged the unity, his breakthrough to Radiant Rank began with explosive force. Purple energy flowed through his white hair as his power signature shifted toward fundamentally different scales of capability. His god's eyes enhanced the process, allowing him to perceive and guide the transformation with precision that would have been impossible for someone without the Kagu bloodline. The space-time magic he'd learned from Liam's inheritance provided the foundation for advancement that integrated perfectly with his physical cultivation. "The threshold," he said, his voice carrying new depth as fundamental changes took place. "I can feel it breaking." Power coursed through him in patterns that made his martial techniques evolve in real time. Where he'd once been fast and precise, he was now developing capabilities that bordered on prescience, the ability to perceive and respond to attacks before they fully developed. When his breakthrough completed, Ren opened eyes that glowed with distinctive purple energy. He moved with coordination that transcended normal human limitations, his every gesture carrying implications of space-time manipulation. "Incredible," he said, testing his new capabilities with a combination that created multiple spatial distortions while accelerating his personal time frame. "Everything feels completely different." "Both of you," I said with genuine amazement as I looked between my newly Radiant Rank companions. "You've achieved in days what would normally take months even for geniuses of your level." "The facility," Seraphina said with appreciation for what Liam had created. It didn't force our advancement. It just removed the barriers that normally slow down natural development and provided the knowledge framework necessary for proper unity achievement. Ren added with understanding of what his ancestor had accomplished. Most people spend years trying to figure out the theoretical foundations we absorbed in hours. I nodded with agreement, noting how their breakthroughs had been perfectly supported by everything we'd learned. The training platforms hadn't created artificial advancement. They'd simply accelerated natural potential that both of them had always possessed. So what now? I asked, studying how the chamber's energy patterns had shifted to accommodate their new power levels. Now we test these new capabilities, Serafina said with confidence that carried radiant rank authority, and figure out how to get home so we can put them to use. The real work is just beginning, Ren added with determination that reflected his inherited responsibility. We've gained the power Liam thought we'd need. Now we have to prove worthy of it. Chapter 871, Undead Evolution. With both Serafina and Ren having achieved their radiant rank breakthroughs, I found myself drawn back to my own training. Not to learn from Liam's inheritance, but to push my own sword mastery toward something I could feel approaching at the edge of my understanding. I drew my sword and began moving through forms that had become second nature after years of practice. Each strike carried perfect sword unity, the complete integration between blade and wielder that I'd achieved some time ago. But as I moved through the sequences, I could sense something more waiting just beyond my current reach. There's another level, I murmured, completing a complex pattern that left traces of energy in the air. Something beyond unity itself. The realization brought back a memory I'd tried not to dwell on. My master's final moments before the corruption consumed him completely. Even as the miasma ate away at Magnus Drakar's body, he had managed one last sword strike that transcended everything he'd ever taught me. The blade moved through space. I remembered, seeing it again in perfect clarity. But not just physical space. Magnus' final strike tore the sky itself apart. Not through magic or external power, but through pure sword technique that touched something fundamental about reality. I'd been amazed at the time. Now, I was able to achieve similar, if not better effects by channeling gray energy through my blade. But Magnus had done it with nothing but perfectly refined sword technique and mana. His blade cutting through the very fabric of existence to rip apart the sky. What are you thinking about? Serafina asked, watching my practice from her own training area. My master's final technique, I replied, attempting to recreate the motion I'd witnessed. He achieved something with pure sword work that I can only match using gray energy. There's a level of sword mastery beyond unity that I'm starting to sense. Can you reach it? Ren inquired, his newly enhanced perception tracking the subtle energy patterns around my movements. Not yet, I admitted, feeling the boundary remain frustratingly out of reach. I can sense it exists, but actually achieving it, that's still far beyond me. I sheathed my sword, accepting that some discoveries couldn't be rushed. Just knowing that level existed was valuable preparation for future growth. Let's explore more of this place, I suggested. If Liam preserved his knowledge and training methods, there might be other resources we haven't found yet. We began systematically investigating the facility's impossible architecture, discovering chambers that served various specialized purposes. Some contained research materials, others held strange devices whose functions weren't immediately clear. It was Ren who found the artifact vault. Arthur Serafina, he called from a corridor branching off the main training area. You need to see this. We followed his voice to a circular chamber lined with alcoves containing various legendary-grade items. Weapons, armor pieces, and magical implements all radiated tremendous power, but one set immediately drew our attention. A pair of gauntlets rested in the central alcove, their adamantine surface covered with intricate patterns that shifted between depicting spatial tiers and gravitational fields. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, enhanced with materials I didn't recognize. Those belonged to him, Ren said with certainty, his god's eyes analyzing the artifacts. Liam Kagu's personal gauntlets. I can see the attunement patterns. They're designed for space-time magic and fist-fighting integration. The moment Ren approached, The gauntlets began glowing with purple light that matched his bloodline signature. When he reached out, they practically leaped to his hands, conforming perfectly to his grip. "Perfect fit," he said with wonder, flexing his fingers as the gauntlets adjusted automatically. They recognized the family bloodline. I watched purple energy flow through the intricate patterns, enhancing Ren's already improved capabilities. When he threw a practice punch, space folded around his fist in ways that would multiply the impact tremendously. Legendary-grade artifacts that enhance space-time manipulation, Serafina observed. "Your ancestor left you quite an inheritance." "They're not just weapons," Ren said, studying the complex magical matrices. "I can feel knowledge flowing through them. Techniques Liam developed that integrate perfectly with martial arts and spatial magic." Watching Ren receive such a significant enhancement got me thinking about my own undead companions and opportunities I'd been too cautious to pursue. "This place is making me reconsider some development choices I've been putting off," I said, my mind racing through possibilities, especially regarding Erebus and Valeria. "You're undead?" Serafina asked with curiosity. "Erebus has been at Arch-Lich level for a while, but I've been hesitant to push his evolution further. And I've never properly explored what might be possible with Valeria," I explained, reaching into my spatial storage. "But seeing what's achievable here." I pulled out 2 items, Bahamut's Dragon Heart, pulsing with tremendous concentrated power, and the remaining pieces of the Basilisk's Heart that I'd cut away during Erebus's previous enhancement. Both my companions stared at the Dragon Heart with shock. "Arthur," Serafina said, "is that what I think it is?" "Bahamut's Heart," I confirmed. "Why didn't you use it yourself?" she asked with concern. "That kind of power source could help push you toward mid-radiant rank." I considered the question carefully. My limitation isn't really about mana capacity. It's about understanding and technique development. This power would be better utilized helping Erebus achieve a proper evolution. I summoned my Arch-Lich, and Erebus materialized with his usual dignified bearing. His glowing eye sockets immediately fixed on both hearts in my hands. "Master," he said in his resonant voice, "you propose a complete advancement." "Lich King level," I confirmed, "using the Dragon Heart's mana to refine your 3 core components, your 9-star skeleton, 9-star skull, and the incomplete Basilisk Heart. I'm going to restore the heart to full power first." Erebus studied both items analytically. "The approach is sound. My skeletal frame and skull require further refinement to properly support Lich King status, while the heart needs completion." I carefully began reattaching the cut portions of the Basilisk's Heart to Erebus's chest cavity, using precise mana manipulation to restore the organ to its original configuration. The process was delicate, requiring perfect alignment of the heart's natural energy flows. "There," I said as the restoration completed. "Full Basilisk's Heart restored. Now we can use the Dragon Heart's power for proper refinement." I handed Erebus roughly half of Bahamut's crystallized heart. "Use this to elevate each component systematically. Don't rush the process." "Understood, Master." As Erebus began the complex refinement process, I found my thoughts turning to my other undead companion. Valeria represented an entirely different kind of challenge. "What about the symbiote?" Serafina asked. "Valeria is unique," I said, feeling the bone creature stir in response to my attention. "She's not like other ancient undead. She's something completely new that I created. Her evolution possibilities don't follow any established patterns. I had created Valeria through a process that had never been attempted before, combining various elements in ways that produced something unprecedented. Unlike Erebus, who followed known undead advancement paths despite being ancient undead himself, Valeria was genuinely one of a kind with no precedent to guide her development. "How do you evolve something that has no precedent?" Ren asked practically. "That's what I need to figure out," I replied, watching energy begin to flow through Erebus as he started refining his skeletal structure. "Traditional methods won't work because she doesn't fit traditional categories." Valeria emerged from my shadow, taking her humanoid bone form as she responded to my focused attention. Her hollow eye sockets regarded me with intelligence that had grown considerably since her creation. She's not just bonded to me. She's evolved alongside me, I observed, studying her elegant structure. Her growth has been organic, responding to our shared experiences. But since I reached Radiant rank, her growth stopped. So her evolution would need to be equally organic? Seraphina suggested. Possibly, I said, feeling pieces of understanding beginning to align. But there's something specific about her nature, about how she was created, that suggests a particular direction. A surge of power from Erebus drew our attention as his skeleton began glowing with refined energy. The ancient undead was systematically elevating each component, using the dragon heart's power to push his physical form beyond its current limitations. The refinement is proceeding well, Erebus reported, his voice carrying new harmonics as his skull underwent enhancement. Each component is approaching the threshold for Lich King status. I nodded with satisfaction, then returned my attention to Valeria. As I contemplated her unique nature and the circumstances of her creation, a sudden flash of insight struck me. I know what needs to be done, I said quietly, understanding crystallizing in my mind. Not just how to evolve her, but what kind of evolution would be most appropriate for what she is. What do you mean? Seraphina asked with curiosity. I looked at Valeria with new appreciation, seeing not just what she was now, but what she could become through the right approach. The solution wasn't about following established patterns or forcing artificial advancement. It was about understanding the fundamental nature of what I had created and helping it reach its true potential. I'll explain once Erebus completes his evolution, I said, watching as the Lich King transformation entered its final phase. But I finally understand what Valeria really is, and what she's capable of becoming. Chapter 872, New Weapon. The chamber filled with deep dark as Erebus reached the critical phase of his evolution. His skeletal frame blazed with power as the dragon heart's mana flowed through him, systematically refining each component of his undead form. The 9-star skeleton grew denser, more imposing, while his skull expanded slightly to accommodate the enhanced magical capacity flowing through it. The refinement is nearly complete, Erebus announced, his voice carrying new depths of authority. The restored basilisk heart is integrating perfectly with the enhanced skeletal structure. I watched with satisfaction as my first and most reliable undead companion underwent his transformation. The process was methodical, controlled, exactly what I'd expected from Erebus's analytical approach to advancement. Unlike the chaotic power surges that marked some evolutions, this was precise engineering of undead physiology. How does it feel? I asked as the energy flows began to stabilize. Magnificent, Erebus replied, testing his newly enhanced form. The fusion of components has created something far beyond their individual capabilities. I am no longer merely an arch-lich. I have become a true Lich King. The change was immediately apparent. Where Erebus had previously radiated the controlled menace of high-level undead, he now possessed the commanding presence that marked genuine undead royalty. His power signature had crossed definitively into Radiant rank territory, putting him on par with some of the strongest beings I'd encountered. Excellent, I said with genuine pride. You've earned this advancement through centuries of service and development. Thank you, Master, Erebus said, inclining his enhanced skull respectfully. I am eager to test these new capabilities in service to your goals. With Erebus's evolution complete, I turned my attention to the more complex challenge of Valeria's advancement. The bone symbiote had been observing from my shadow, her interest apparent even in her current form. Your turn, I told her, and she emerged to take her humanoid bone shape. But unlike Erebus's straightforward evolution path, Valeria's situation required a completely different approach. She was unique among ancient undead, created through processes that had no established precedent. Traditional advancement methods simply wouldn't apply. The problem, I said, thinking aloud as I studied her elegant bone structure, is that you're limited by your own uniqueness. There's no established path for your development because nothing like you has ever existed before. What are you considering? Seraphina asked, Noting my contemplative expression, I reached into my spatial storage and withdrew Nixthar, my edgeless legendary greatsword. The blade appeared in my hand with its characteristic lack of visible cutting edge, the weapon that had served me faithfully through countless battles. Legendary grade artifacts, I said, holding the sword up to catch the chamber's ambient light. They're fascinating in how they function. How so? Ren asked, his new gauntlets providing him with enhanced understanding of magical artifact construction. Most legendary-grade artifacts adapt to their wielders once the user reaches Radiant rank, I explained, turning Nixthar in my hands. They transform into whatever weapon form would be most suitable for that particular person's fighting style and capabilities. I gestured toward Ren's newly acquired gauntlets. Your family's legendary artifact is a perfect example. For you, it takes the form of gauntlets that enhance your fist fighting and spacetime magic. But for your Aunt Celine, the same artifact manifests as a glaive, the weapon that best suits her particular combat style and magical affinities. Adaptive weapons, Seraphina said with understanding. They become whatever the user needs most. Exactly, I confirmed. It's what makes legendary-grade artifacts so valuable. They grow with their wielders, becoming increasingly powerful and specialized as the bond deepens. I studied Nixthar's unchanging form with new appreciation. But this sword doesn't do that. It's remained exactly the same since I first acquired it, regardless of my advancement or changing needs. Is that a limitation? Ren asked. Yes and no, I replied, considering the implications. On one hand, it means Nixthar isn't optimizing itself for my current capabilities. But on the other hand, it suggests this sword operates on principles that transcend normal artifact behavior. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Nixthar's unchanging nature might actually be a strength rather than a weakness. While other legendary artifacts became specialized for their users, Nixthar remained adaptable to any situation, a weapon that could function perfectly regardless of circumstances. Valeria has a similar limitation, I continued, the pieces of my plan beginning to fall into place. She's unique, with no established evolution path, which constrains her development. But what if that uniqueness could be combined with something equally unique? I looked between Valeria and Nixthar, seeing possibilities that hadn't occurred to me before. Both were one-of-a-kind entities that operated outside normal classification systems. Perhaps their combination could create something that transcended the limitations affecting each individually. You're thinking of merging them, Seraphina said with growing excitement. Not just merging, I corrected, feeling certainty crystallize in my mind. Creating something entirely new. Valeria's bone composition could integrate with Nixthar's structure, while the sword's legendary grade properties could enhance her capabilities beyond normal undead limitations. But how? Ren asked practically. Merging a living undead with a weapon isn't exactly standard magical procedure. I smiled, reaching for the gift that had made me uniquely suited for attempting the impossible. That's where my Mythweaver ability comes in. The Mythweaver gift was perhaps my most unusual capability, the power to alter stories and myths themselves, to rewrite the fundamental narratives that defined how things worked. I'd used it sparingly, understanding that such power came with significant risks, but this situation called for exactly that kind of fundamental alteration. Mythweaver, Seraphina asked with curiosity. My gift lets me change stories and myths, I explained, calling up the strange energy that marked the ability's activation. Not just creating new stories, but actually altering existing ones. Rewriting the fundamental narratives that define how things function. I could feel the gift responding to my intent, reality becoming more malleable as the power built around me. This wasn't just about combining two entities. It was about creating a new story that explained how such a combination could exist and function. The story of Valeria, I said, beginning to weave new narrative threads around her existence. An ancient undead created through unprecedented methods, who achieved her next evolution by bonding with a legendary weapon that defied conventional artifact behavior. The chamber filled with strange energy as the Mythweaver gift took effect. I wasn't just using magic to force a merger. I was rewriting the fundamental story of what both Valeria and Nixthar were, creating new possibilities for their combined existence. Arthur, Erebus said with concern, the power you're channeling operates on dangerous levels. I know, I replied, maintaining careful control as the gift reshaped reality around my intent. But this is the only way to give Valeria the evolution she deserves. I reached out to Valeria with one hand while gripping Nixthar with the other, using the Mythweaver ability to bridge the gap between bone and metal, between undead consciousness and weapon essence. The story becomes, I said, speaking the new narrative into existence, that an ancient undead of unprecedented nature bonded with a legendary weapon of equally unique properties, creating something that transcended both individual forms. Reality rippled around us as the gift took hold. Valeria's bone structure began to resonate with Nixthar's metal, while the sword's edge started taking on characteristics that matched her elegant design. The merger wasn't violent or forced. It was natural, inevitable, as if this combination had always been meant to happen. It's working, Seraphina breathed, watching as bone and metal began to flow together. The process was unlike anything I'd witnessed before. Valeria's consciousness remained intact while her physical form integrated with Nixthar's structure. The sword's legendary properties enhanced her capabilities, while her unique nature allowed the weapon to finally achieve the adaptability that had been dormant within it. The narrative is taking hold, I said, feeling the Mythweaver gift complete its work. Valeria and Nixthar are becoming something new. The energy reached its peak as the final aspects of the merger locked into place. When the power settled, I found myself holding something that was neither sword nor symbiote, but a perfect fusion of both. The weapon in my hands retained Nixthar's basic form but now pulsed with Valeria's consciousness. The blade edge shimmered with bone-white energy while maintaining its legendary sharpness. Most remarkably, I could sense Valeria's awareness within the weapon, her intelligence enhanced by the sword's magical properties. Master, came a voice that was unmistakably Valeria's, though it now carried harmonics that spoke to her transformed nature. The merger is complete. I stared at the transformed weapon with amazement. The combination had worked beyond my most optimistic expectations, creating something that possessed both Valeria's unique capabilities and Nixthar's legendary properties. Chapter 873, Ren's Rescue. Time to head home, I announced, looking around the facility that had provided us with so much advancement in such a short period. Ren, your family will be worried sick about you. More than worried, Ren agreed, flexing his hands in Liam's legendary gauntlets. They probably have search teams combing the entire region by now. My Aunt Celine was already in a healing coma when I left. If she's awakened to find me missing, then we'd better get you back quickly, Seraphina said with practical concern. We began making our way back through the facility's impossible architecture toward the chamber where we'd first arrived. The training platforms had gone dormant now that their immediate purpose was fulfilled, while the historical records carved into the walls remained available for future study. Will this place stay accessible? I asked as we walked through corridors that defied normal geometric principles. I believe so, Ren replied, studying the energy flows that maintained the pocket dimension. Liam designed it to remain available for future generations of the Kagu family. Though accessing it probably requires specific circumstances, bloodline recognition, genuine need, that sort of thing. Makes sense, I said. Knowledge like this shouldn't be easily accessible to just anyone. As we approached the exit chamber, I found myself reflecting on what we'd accomplished. The advancement gains were impressive, but they represented something larger than just individual power increases. You know, I said thoughtfully, the number of Radiant rank humans is about to increase dramatically. What do you mean? Seraphina asked, though I could see understanding beginning to dawn in her expression. Think about it, I continued, opening a spatial portal back to the outside world. We're not the only ones approaching these power levels. My other fiancés, for instance. The portal stabilized, showing us the familiar landscape near the Kagu family territory. Sunlight streamed through, reminding me how long we'd been in the artificial environment of Liam's sanctuary. Not just them, I added as we stepped through. Ian, Jean, Rin, Callie, Lucifer if he hasn't reached it yet. There will be many more Radiant rankers. We emerged into the real world, and I took a moment to adjust to natural lighting and normal atmospheric conditions. The facility had been comfortable, but there was something refreshing about being back under an actual sky. The new generation, Rin observed, looking toward his family's distant compound. Exactly, I agreed, beginning the journey back toward the Kagu estate. The conflicts we've faced, the training opportunities we've encountered, the knowledge we've gained. It's all contributing to an unprecedented surge in high-level human capability. The political implications alone will be significant, Serafina pointed out as we traveled. That many Radiant rank individuals emerging in such a short time frame will shift power balances across multiple regions. Good, I replied firmly. Humanity needs strong defenders, especially considering some of the threats we've been encountering lately. The trip back to the Kagu compound gave us time to process everything that had happened. I still can't quite believe we found Liam's actual training facility, Rin said as the family buildings came into view. Stories about the first hero's lost sanctuary have been passed down for generations, but most people assumed they were just legends. Sometimes legends turn out to be historical records, I replied. Your ancestor was clearly planning for long-term contingencies. As we approached the estate grounds, our arrival was immediately noticed. Guards who'd obviously been part of search efforts looked relieved, while servants rushed to alert the family leadership. Ran! Came a voice that carried both authority and genuine concern. I turned to see a woman approaching with controlled urgency. Celine Kagu, Ren's aunt and the current family matriarch. She was an impressive figure, tall and elegant with the distinctive white hair and purple eyes that marked the bloodline. More importantly, she radiated the unmistakable power signature of someone operating at high Radiant rank. Aunt Celine, Rin said with obvious relief and affection. You're awake. I came out of the healing coma just after you disappeared, she replied, reaching out to embrace her nephew. Just in time to discover you'd vanished without any explanation. Do you have any idea how worried we've all been? I'm sorry, Rin said sincerely. It wasn't planned. I was investigating unusual energy readings during routine patrol when I found myself transported to... Well, that's going to require a long explanation. Celine's experienced gaze took in the obvious changes in her nephew. The enhanced presence, the legendary artifacts on his hands, the confident bearing that marked genuine advancement. Her eyes widened slightly as recognition dawned. You've grown much stronger, she observed carefully. Much stronger, Rin confirmed. Aunt Celine, I discovered something incredible. Liam's inheritance, his actual training facility. The revelation hit Celine like a physical blow. She stared at Rin for several seconds, processing implications that spoke to deep family knowledge and centuries of searching. The lost sanctuary, she whispered. We've been looking for it for 200 years. It found me, Rin said simply. Or maybe I was finally ready to find it. Either way, I've learned things about our family's capabilities and history that change everything. I watched the reunion with satisfaction, noting how relief and excitement were replacing the tension that had marked our initial arrival. Family members gathered as word spread of Ren's return, their expressions showing mixtures of concern, curiosity, and growing amazement as they noticed his obvious advancement. Arthur Serafina, Celine said, turning to address us with formal gratitude. The Kagu family owes you both a tremendous debt for helping to find Rin and ensuring his safe return. No debt necessary, I replied. We were glad to help, and the experience proved valuable for all of us. Still, Celine insisted. You went into unknown danger to retrieve a member of our family. That kind of loyalty deserves recognition and reward. The opportunity to train in Liam's facility was reward enough, Serafina said diplomatically. We all benefited from what we discovered there. As the family gathered to hear Ren's full account of his experiences, I found myself reflecting on how much had been accomplished. Not just the personal advancement and power increases, but the recovery of knowledge that had been lost for generations. The gauntlets, Celine said quietly, studying the legendary artifacts on Ren's hands. Those are his actual gauntlets, aren't they? They are, Ren confirmed. Along with knowledge of techniques he developed, historical records of his battles, and training methods that accelerated my development beyond anything I thought possible. And the others? Celine asked, looking at Serafina and me. You both seem different as well. We all achieved significant advancement, I said carefully. The facility was designed to prepare people for threats that required capabilities beyond normal human limitations. Radiant rank, Celine said with understanding. You've both crossed that threshold. We have, Serafina confirmed, though the knowledge we gained may prove even more valuable than the power increase. As the conversation continued and family members shared their relief at Ren's safe return, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what successful missions should feel like. Problems solved, people safely returned home, capabilities enhanced for everyone involved. The search teams were called off, celebration preparations began, and the Kagu family started adapting to the reality that their missing member had returned not just safely, but significantly stronger and carrying artifacts they'd thought lost forever. Mission complete, I said quietly to myself, watching Ren demonstrate some of his new capabilities to an amazed audience of family members. For once, everything had worked out exactly as it should. We'd found what we came looking for, achieved more than we'd hoped for, and everyone was heading home stronger than before. Sometimes, victory really could be this straightforward and peaceful. Chapter 874, Honored Guests. The main residence of the Kagu estate buzzed with renewed energy as word spread that Ren had not only been found but had returned significantly stronger than when he disappeared. Advanced communication systems throughout the compound carried updates to family members across the eastern continent, while staff moved with the efficient purpose of those preparing for an important celebration. The formal reception hall has been prepared, Celine announced as she led us through corridors lined with portraits of Kagu ancestors. The entire family wishes to properly express their gratitude for what you've accomplished. I walked beside her, noting how different her demeanor was now compared to our first meeting days ago. The desperate worry had been replaced by genuine relief and something approaching awe as she processed the magnitude of what had been achieved. Bringing Ren home safely would have been enough, she continued, her voice carrying deep emotion. But to have him return with Liam's inheritance, having achieved such dramatic advancement, it exceeds our wildest hopes. He earned those gains through his own capabilities, I replied. We simply helped him find the opportunity. The formal reception hall was an impressive space designed to host diplomatic gatherings and important family ceremonies. High ceilings supported by elegantly carved pillars created an atmosphere of grandeur, while holographic displays along the walls showed real-time feeds from various family holdings across the continent. Kem Kagu stood at the center of the room, flanked by his wife Yuki and their twin children. The moment we entered, the entire family dropped into the deep, formal bows reserved for figures of the highest importance. Second hero Arthur Nightingale, Kem said with profound reverence. On behalf of the entire Kagu family lineage, I express our eternal gratitude for your personal intervention in finding our son and heir. Princess Serafina of Mount Hua, Yuki added, her emerald hair catching the ambient light as she maintained her respectful bow. Your assistance in this mission honors our family beyond measure. The twins, He and Min, watched with wide violet eyes, clearly amazed to be in the presence of figures they'd only heard about in news reports and family stories. Their expressions showed the kind of awe reserved for living legends. Please rise, I said with appropriate courtesy. Seeing Ren safely returned to his family is reward enough. Nevertheless, Kem insisted as the family straightened, what you have accomplished in 3 days exceeded what our entire organization could achieve with unlimited resources and time. You didn't just find our missing heir. You helped him discover his true potential. Ren stepped forward, his presence now radiating the enhanced power he'd gained in Liam's facility. The legendary gauntlets on his hands gleamed with subtle energy, while his overall bearing showed the confidence that came with genuine advancement. Father, mother, he said with obvious emotion. I need to properly explain what happened to me, and what these two accomplished on my behalf. Of course, Yuki replied, though her attention remained focused on properly hosting such distinguished guests. But first, we must ensure the second hero and Princess Serafina understand the depth of our family's gratitude. We were guided to an elevated seating area where refreshments had been arranged with the kind of attention to detail that marked formal diplomatic occasions. The estate's environmental systems automatically adjusted temperature and lighting to optimal levels, while discreet service drones provided anything that might be needed. When Ren first disappeared, Kem began as we settled into comfortable arrangements. We feared the worst. In these times, with threats emerging across all continents, the sudden vanishing of a family heir suggests terrible possibilities. We mobilized every resource, Celine added, taking her place beside her brother. Search teams, surveillance networks, contacts throughout the intelligence community. Nothing yielded results. Then word reached us that the second hero had personally agreed to assist in our search. Yuki continued with obvious amazement. That someone of your legendary status would involve himself in what could have been dismissed as a routine missing person case. It demonstrated a nobility of character that exceeded even the stories told about your heroic achievements. Kem finished with sincere admiration. I nodded acknowledgement while privately reflecting on how the situation had evolved beyond anyone's initial expectations. What had started as a favor to help a concerned family had led to discoveries that could affect much larger concerns. The results speak for themselves, Serafina said diplomatically. Ren was not only found safely but emerged from his experience significantly enhanced. The advancement alone represents years of normal development, Celine observed, studying her nephew with professional assessment. But beyond that, the artifacts he's acquired. Ren raised his hands, allowing the legendary gauntlets to catch the light. Liam Kagu's personal weapons. I still can hardly believe they're real. 2 centuries, Kem said with wonder. We've preserved stories about our ancestors' lost sanctuary. Finding it seemed impossible, but activating its systems and completing its trials, that required capabilities far beyond what any of us possessed individually, Ren said, looking directly at me and Serafina. Without their assistance, I would never have achieved what became possible. The family listened with growing amazement as Ren described his experiences in the training facility. The impossible architecture, the knowledge inheritance platforms, the systematic advancement that had elevated his capabilities beyond normal limitations. Each detail reinforced their understanding of what had been accomplished. The implications extend far beyond our family, Celine said with growing seriousness. If Liam's facility was designed to prepare for future threats, then the second hero's assistance in activating it may have broader importance than even this remarkable personal achievement. Kem concluded with understanding. We should all be preparing for challenges that may require enhanced capabilities. I agreed, noting how the conversation was naturally moving toward larger concerns. The Kagu family pledges ourselves as allies to both the second hero and Mount Hua sect, Kem declared with formal authority. Our resources, our knowledge, our connections across the eastern continent, all are at your disposal should future need arise. Such alliance is greatly appreciated, Serafina replied with diplomatic courtesy. More than appreciated, Yuki added with maternal warmth that transcended political formalities. It's necessary. What you've done for our family creates bonds that extend far beyond simple gratitude. As the formal expressions of thanks continued, I found myself impressed by the Kagu family's combination of genuine emotion and practical intelligence. They understood that Ren's safe return was just the beginning of developments that could affect much larger concerns. Will you honor us by staying for the celebration dinner? Yuki asked as the immediate formalities began to conclude. The entire extended family wishes to properly express their appreciation, and our finest chefs have prepared specialties from across the eastern continent. We would be honored, I replied, recognizing the invitation as both hospitality and continued respect for our assistance. Excellent, Kem said with obvious pleasure. It will give us opportunity to discuss how our family might support whatever future endeavors the second hero may undertake. As arrangements began for an elaborate dinner celebration, I reflected on how completely successful this mission had become. Not only had we found Ren safely, but everyone involved had emerged stronger, with valuable new alliances formed and ancient knowledge recovered. The evening promised to be a fitting conclusion to what had started as a rescue mission and evolved into something far more significant. Chapter 875, Home to the Mountains. The warp gate's familiar surge of dimensional energy gave way to crisp mountain air and the sight of ancient buildings perched on impossible peaks. Mount Huasek spread before us in all its timeless glory, exactly as I remembered, yet somehow more impressive now that I was viewing it with enhanced perception. "Home," Serafina said softly, a genuine smile crossing her face as she took in the familiar sights. We'd left the Kagu estate with their endless gratitude still ringing in our ears, promises of eternal alliance, and enough formal gifts to stock a small treasury. The mission had been an unqualified success. Run was safe, stronger than ever, and his family's position had been dramatically improved by the recovery of Liam's inheritance. "It's good to be back," I agreed, though my feelings about Mount Hua were always complicated. Too many memories, both challenging and wonderful, tied to these peaks. Lee Zenith was the first to greet us as we stepped off the platform, his weathered face breaking into a smile that carried both relief and curiosity. "Arthur, Serafina. Successful mission, I take it." "Very successful," Serafina replied, embracing her uncle with obvious affection. "Run is safely home with his family, stronger than when he disappeared. And you both look different," Lee observed with the keen eye of someone who'd spent decades evaluating student progress. "Stronger, more consolidated." His gaze lingered on Serafina with growing amazement as he registered the full scope of the change in her power signature. "Serafina, you've achieved Radiant rank," she confirmed with quiet pride. The experience was more transformative than I expected. Lee's expression shifted to pure joy and amazement. "Radiant rank. My dear niece, this is incredible news." He pulled her into another embrace, this one carrying the pride of a teacher whose student had exceeded all expectations. "Mo will be beside himself with happiness." "Where is father?" she asked, looking around the arrival area. "In his study, reviewing sect business. But once he hears this news," Lee shook his head with a grin, "I think he'll abandon whatever he's working on." We began walking through Mount Hua's familiar paths, past training courtyards where disciples practiced forms that had been perfected over centuries. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mountain stone, while the distant sound of waterfalls provided a constant backdrop of natural music. "The sect looks prosperous," I observed, noting improvements and expansions that hadn't been here during my last visit. "Mo's leadership has brought stability and growth," Lee explained with obvious pride. "Enrollment applications have tripled, our reputation across the eastern continent continues growing, and the disciples are more focused than they've been in decades." Speaking of disciples, came a familiar voice that immediately set my teeth on edge. Sun Zenith emerged from one of the side paths, his expression carrying the same petty arrogance I remembered from years past. At 27, he'd grown into his low radiant rank power with all the grace of someone who'd never learned humility. "Well, well," Sun said with a smirk, "the prodigal daughter returns. And she's brought her." His words trailed off as he registered my presence and power signature. Whatever insult he'd been planning died on his lips as recognition dawned. "Sun," I said with carefully neutral politeness. "Still the same charming personality, I see." "Arthur Nightingale," he said, his arrogance rapidly transforming into nervous respect. "The second hero. I didn't realize you were visiting." "Just helping with family business," I replied, letting just enough energy leak into my presence that the air seemed to shimmer slightly, making sure everyone understands proper boundaries. Sun's face went pale as he processed the implications. The last time I'd been here, he'd made snide comments about Serafina's status in the family. Now he was facing someone who could end his existence with a casual thought. "Of course," he said quickly, stepping aside with considerably less swagger. "Family is important." "Glad we agree," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm sure you have training to attend to." Sun practically fled back down the side path, leaving us to continue toward the sect's administrative center in peace. Some people never change, Lee muttered with disapproval. Though I suspect his attitude will improve significantly after today. One can hope, Serafina said diplomatically, though I caught the slight satisfaction in her voice. We reached the main administrative building as disciples were transitioning between afternoon training sessions and evening meal preparation. The efficient organization was impressive. Everyone knew their role and executed it with precision that spoke to clear leadership and high morale. Mo has truly transformed this place, I said with genuine admiration. He understands that strength comes from unity as much as individual power, Lee explained. When everyone works toward the same goals, the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. The doors to Mo's study opened to reveal a space that perfectly balanced tradition with modern practicality. Ancient scrolls shared wall space with holographic displays, while traditional tea settings occupied the same table as advanced communication equipment. Mo himself rose from behind his desk as we entered, his face lighting up with paternal warmth the moment he saw Serafina. "My daughter, welcome home. How did the mission?" He stopped mid-sentence as he registered the fundamental change in her power signature. His eyes widened with amazement and pride that quickly transformed into pure joy. "Serafina," he breathed, moving around his desk to embrace her. "You've achieved Radiant rank." "I have," she confirmed with quiet happiness. The experience was extraordinary. Mo held her at arm's length, studying her with the careful attention of both a father and a sect leader evaluating a momentous achievement. "This is incredible news, not just for you personally, but for Mount Hua sect. To have our heir achieve Radiant rank at your age. The youngest Radiant rank practitioner of Mount Hua techniques in sect history," Lee added with obvious pride. "We must celebrate," Mo declared, his formal demeanor giving way to parental excitement. "This achievement deserves proper recognition." "The mission was successful as well," I interjected, noting how Serafina's advancement was overshadowing our original purpose. "Ren was found safely and has returned to his family significantly stronger." Of course, Mo said, though his attention remained focused on his daughter. "I'm glad the young Kagu heir is safe. But Serafina achieving Radiant rank." He shook his head with wonder. "This changes everything." We settled into comfortable seating where tea had been prepared, though the atmosphere was far more celebratory than our previous visit had been. Mo's joy was infectious, and evenly seemed unable to stop smiling as he processed the implications of Serafina's advancement. "Tell me about the breakthrough," Mo said, leaning forward with intense curiosity. "What was the catalyst? How did you achieve unity?" Serafina spent the next hour describing her experience in Liam's training facility, the knowledge inheritance platforms, the systematic advancement opportunities, and the moment when her ice magic and sword techniques finally achieved perfect integration. "Sword unity," Mo said with reverence, "combined with your enhanced ice crystal jade body and elevated magical understanding. The foundation you've built is extraordinary." "The training facility was unlike anything I'd imagined possible," she agreed. "Liam Kagu's techniques accelerated development in ways that would normally take years." "And Arthur?" Mo asked, turning his attention to me. "I assume you also benefited from the experience?" "Some advancement in my existing capabilities," I replied carefully. "The real achievement was helping Rin and Serafina reach their potential." Mo nodded with understanding, recognizing that my development operated on different scales than traditional advancement paths. As the second hero, my challenges involved capabilities that transcended normal progression. "Well," he said, returning his attention to Serafina with obvious pride, "this calls for special recognition." He moved to the ornate cabinet where I remembered him storing the heavenly violet pills, retrieving the same wooden box that had once held my own advancement catalyst. "Father," Serafina said with growing understanding. "You don't need to." "I absolutely do," Mo interrupted with firm authority. "You've achieved Radiant rank, proven yourself worthy of our most advanced techniques, and brought honor to Mount Hua sect. This is exactly what these pills were created for. He opened the box to reveal the remaining pills, perfect spheres of deep violet that seemed to capture the essence of spring itself, dotted with crystallized starlight and radiating power that made the air shimmer. A heavenly violet pill, he said formally, selecting one with careful reverence, to help you consolidate your advancement and prepare for whatever comes next. Serafina accepted the pill with appropriate respect, though I could see the amazement in her eyes. She understood exactly how valuable these were, not just in terms of resources, but in the concentrated knowledge they represented. "Thank you, Father," she said with deep emotion. "I'll use this to honor Mount Hua sect and justify your faith in me." "I know you will," Mo replied with absolute confidence. As the celebration continued and plans were made for Serafina to properly integrate her advancement, I found myself thinking about my own next steps. The mission was complete, Serafina was home with her family, and my presence here was no longer necessary. "I should probably head back to Avalon City," I said during a natural lull in the conversation. "There are things I need to attend to at home." "Of course," Mo said with understanding. "Though Mount Hua's doors are always open to you, Arthur. You'll always have a place here." "I think I'll stay for a while," Serafina said, settling more comfortably into her chair. "It's been too long since I spent proper time here, and there are techniques I want to explore now that I've reached Radiant rank." "Excellent," Lee said with obvious pleasure. "Having you home will be good for everyone." As arrangements were made for my departure and Serafina's extended stay, I reflected on how perfectly this mission had concluded. Everyone had gotten what they needed. Ran was safe and stronger. The Kagu family had recovered their lost inheritance. Serafina had achieved her advancement goals, and Mount Hua sect had regained their most promising heir. Sometimes success really was this straightforward. "I'll see you soon," I told Serafina as preparations were made for my transport home. "Count on it," she replied with a smile that carried years of shared experiences and future possibilities. Mount Hua sect felt different now, more welcoming, more like the true home it had always been for those who belonged here. And Serafina, finally achieving the power she'd always possessed the potential for, belonged here completely. Chapter 876. Area's News 1. The Warp Gate deposited me in Avalon City's main transportation hub with the familiar surge of dimensional energy that marked the end of long-distance travel. After days spent in ancient training facilities and formal family estates, stepping back into the bustling modernity of my home city felt like returning to a different world entirely. Avalon City stretched out before me in all its technological glory, hovering transport platforms weaving between crystal spires, holographic displays advertising everything from advanced mana cultivation techniques to the latest entertainment feeds, and the constant hum of a civilization that had successfully merged magic with cutting-edge technology. But for all the city's impressive scope, my attention was focused on getting home. After the intensity of recent events, I wanted nothing more than the simple comfort of familiar surroundings and the people who mattered most. The journey to our family's residential district took me through areas that showcased exactly why Avalon City had become the crown jewel of the Western continent. Advanced infrastructure supported a population that included some of the most powerful individuals on the planet, while sophisticated defensive arrays ensured that even cosmic-level threats would have difficulty penetrating the city's protections. Our family estate occupied a prime location that balanced privacy with accessibility, the kind of property that reflected both wealth and political significance. As I approached the main residence, I could see that recent security upgrades had been implemented, discreet but powerful defensive systems that would provide protection against threats far beyond normal human capabilities. The front door opened before I could reach for the entry pad, revealing a figure that immediately made all the tension from recent days melt away. "Daddy!" Stella launched herself toward me with the kind of enthusiastic greeting that only a 12-year-old could manage. Black hair flying behind her as she moved, her face lit up with pure joy at seeing me home safely. I caught her in a hug that lifted her off the ground, feeling the simple happiness that came from being genuinely missed by someone who mattered. "Hey there, little star. Miss me?" "Of course I missed you," she said with the kind of indignation that suggested the question was ridiculous. You were gone for days without proper communication updates. Even at 12, Stella's intelligence showed in everything from her vocabulary to the way she analyzed situations. Born without mana in a world where magical ability determined so much, she'd compensated by developing her mind to levels that impressed even adults who'd spent decades cultivating their intellectual capabilities. I'm sorry about the communication gaps, I said, setting her down but keeping my hands on her shoulders. The mission took us to places where normal technology doesn't work properly. Was it dangerous? She asked with the direct curiosity that marked her approach to everything. The news feeds said you were helping the Kagu family, but they didn't provide operational details. Some danger, I admitted, because lying to Stella was pointless. Her analytical mind could detect deception better than most adults. But nothing I couldn't handle. Obviously, she said with the kind of confidence in my abilities that was both touching and absolute. You're the second hero. If you couldn't handle it, who could? Before I could respond to that display of faith, footsteps approached from deeper in the house. I looked up to see Reika emerging from what had once been a formal sitting room but had apparently been converted into some kind of administrative workspace. The sight of her hit me with the same impact it always did. Violet hair caught the afternoon light streaming through tall windows, while her distinctive flower petal eyes, a rare trait that made her gaze seem to contain actual violet blossoms, fixed on me with the kind of devoted attention that made my chest tighten with emotion. But more than her beauty was the obvious change in her power signature. Where she'd once radiated the controlled strength of high immortal rank, now she carried the unmistakable presence of someone who'd crossed into radiant territory. Arthur, she said with the warm smile that had first captured my attention years ago. Welcome home. Reika? I replied, moving toward her with growing amazement. You've achieved radiant rank. Low radiant rank, she confirmed with quiet pride. The breakthrough happened 2 days ago. I pulled her into an embrace that felt like the completion of something that had been missing during my absence. Reika molded against me with the perfect fit that came from years of growing closer, her warmth and familiar scent making me realize exactly how much I'd missed having her nearby. I'm proud of you, I said quietly, meaning every word. Radiant rank at your age is extraordinary. I had good motivation, she replied, her eyes meeting mine with the kind of intensity that spoke to emotions deeper than simple affection. Someone to protect, goals to achieve, a future to build. The reference to our shared future made something warm settle in my chest. Among all my fiancés, Reika had always been the one whose devotion was most complete, most unconditional. Not because she was weak or dependent, but because she'd made a choice to commit herself entirely to our relationship. Stella had followed us, settling into her favorite chair with the kind of attention that suggested she was absorbing every detail of our conversation. Her intelligence meant she understood implications that would escape most adults, and I could see her cataloging information for future reference. Tell me about the families, I said, genuinely curious about what Reika had accomplished. Her face lit up with enthusiasm as she described the families she'd helped establish. Children who'd been orphaned by the ongoing conflicts with demonic forces, given new homes with carefully vetted parents who understood their special needs. Resources provided not just for basic care, but for education and development that would help them reach their potential. The first family has already shown remarkable progress, she continued with obvious pride. The children are responding well to stable environments, and their new parents are committed to providing long-term support. You've built something important, I said with genuine admiration. Creating stability for children who've lost everything, that's work that matters. It matters to me, she agreed, her violet eyes meeting mine with the kind of intensity that spoke to deeply held convictions. But more than that, it's something we can build together. A foundation for the kind of future where children don't have to grow up afraid. The vision she painted was compelling, not just as a goal, but as something we could actually achieve together. With my power and her administrative brilliance, combined with the resources that came with our positions, real change was possible. Speaking of building futures, Stella interjected with the kind of calculated timing that suggested she'd been waiting for the right moment. I've been working on some projects while you were away. What kind of projects? I asked, though I was already smiling at her obvious pride in whatever she'd accomplished. Educational initiatives, she said with the kind of serious tone that made her sound far older than 12. Correspondence with research institutions, analysis of magical theory development, strategic planning for long-term academic advancement. Rekha and I exchanged glances that carried shared amazement at Stella's intellectual development. Show me, I said, genuinely curious about what she'd been working on. The next hour was spent reviewing Stella's projects, which ranged from theoretical papers on mana manipulation to detailed analyses of continental political structures. Her work showed understanding that would have been impressive from graduate students, let alone a 12-year-old working independently. This is remarkable, I said as I finished reading her latest theoretical framework. Your understanding of complex magical interactions is better than most certified practitioners. I have good source material, she replied with obvious pride. Living with the second hero provides access to perspectives that most people never encounter. And good teachers, Rekha added with a smile that spoke to hours spent helping Stella with her studies. She's been working with some of the finest minds in Avalon City. The conversation continued as afternoon shifted toward evening, covering everything from Stella's academic progress to Rekha's ongoing administrative work to my own recent experiences. The comfortable domesticity of it all provided exactly the kind of peaceful conclusion I'd needed after days of intense training and family politics. Daddy, Stella said as we prepared dinner together, are you planning to stay home for a while? For a while, I confirmed, noting the relief in her expression. No immediate missions planned, no urgent crises demanding attention, just time to focus on family. Good, she said with obvious satisfaction, because I have several projects that could benefit from your input, and I have arrangements that need your approval, Rekha added with the kind of devoted attention that made everything else feel secondary. As we settled into the evening routine that marked normal family life, I found myself appreciating exactly how much these quiet moments meant. All the power in the world was meaningless without people who mattered enough to come home to. And this Stella's brilliant mind, Rekha's devoted love, the simple warmth of being genuinely wanted. This was what made everything else worthwhile. Chapter 877. Area's News 2. My phone buzzed with a message just as I was finishing breakfast with Stella and Rekha. The sender made me smile before I'd even read the content. Arya, big brother, coffee today? Have news. Don't you dare say you're too important now. Face with rolling eyes. Arthur, when have I ever been too important for my little sister? Arya, want a list? It's long. Arthur, funny. Where? Arya, Lupoilt. Same place as before. For old time's sake. I stared at the message for a moment, memories flooding back. Lupoilt, the ridiculously expensive coffee shop where we'd gone 8 years ago when she was 14 and I was still a student at Mythos Academy. The place where someone had mysteriously bought us $18,000 coffee, and I'd spent the entire meal calculating how much money we were consuming with each sip. Arthur, that's expensive even for a celebration. Arya, your treat this time. Smiling face with horns. You can afford it now, Mr. Second Hero. Arthur, fine. But you're explaining what this news is that requires premium-priced caffeine. Arya, deal. 1 hour? I showed the exchange to Rekha, who smiled with the kind of understanding that came from knowing how much my family meant to me. Go, she said before I could even ask. Stella and I have administrative work to finish anyway. Family time is important. You're sure? I asked, though I was already reaching for my jacket. Completely sure, she confirmed, her violet eyes warm with genuine affection. Besides, I'm curious about this news that requires such an expensive venue. An hour later, I stood outside Lupoilt, marveling at how the 3-story building looked exactly the same as it had 8 years ago. The same sleek modern architecture, the same subtle indicators of wealth and exclusivity, the same sense that walking through those doors would cost more than most people earned in a month. Arya was already waiting at the entrance, her auburn hair catching the afternoon sun, while her green eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement. At 22, She'd grown into the confidence I'd seen hints of during our teenage years, though she still carried herself with the kind of playful energy that made it impossible to take her too seriously. "Arthur," she called out as I approached. "Ready to pay ridiculous amounts of money for liquid in a cup? Ready to find out what news is important enough to justify it?" I replied with dry affection. The interior was exactly as I remembered: polished floors, ambient lighting, and patrons whose net worth probably required teams of accountants to calculate. We were shown to a private booth, the same kind of high-end seating that had made me feel out of place as a student but now seemed appropriate for someone with my current status. "So," I said as we settled in, "what's this mysterious news that requires premium caffeine?" Aria's grin widened to the point where she could no longer maintain any pretense of suspense. "I'm getting engaged." The announcement hit exactly as she'd intended. I stared at her for several seconds, processing the news and everything it implied, before breaking into a smile that matched her obvious happiness. "Marcus finally worked up the courage?" I asked, referring to her boyfriend of 2 years. "He did," she said with obvious delight. "3 days ago, during dinner at that restaurant we went to for my birthday. He was so nervous he could barely speak coherently, but he managed to get the important words out. "I'm happy for you," I said with complete sincerity. "Marcus is a good man, and he clearly adores you." "He does," she agreed with satisfied confidence. "And I adore him right back, so it works out perfectly." I gestured to the server, noting how Aria's eyes lit up with anticipation. "What's the most expensive coffee you have?" "The Celestial Gold Reserve," the server replied without hesitation. $23,700 per cup. It's enhanced with rare magical ingredients and provides significant cultivation benefits. "2 of those," I said without flinching, though I caught Aria's expression of amazed delight. "Arthur," she said with something approaching awe. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," I interrupted with a smile. 8 years ago, someone mysteriously bought us expensive coffee here. Today, your big brother can afford to do it properly." When the coffee arrived, it was even more impressive than the gold swirl we'd been gifted years ago. Each cup seemed to contain liquid starlight, with swirling patterns that shifted and moved like captured nebulae. The aroma alone made my enhanced senses tingle with appreciation. "This is incredible," Aria breathed, taking her first sip. "It's like drinking concentrated happiness." "At $23,000, it should provide enlightenment and grant 3 wishes," I replied, though I had to admit the coffee was genuinely extraordinary. "Thank you," she said with sudden seriousness. "Not just for the coffee, but for making time for me despite everything else you have going on." The sincerity in her voice touched something deep in my chest. "Aria, you're my sister. There's nothing more important than that." "Sometimes I wonder, though," she said, her tone shifting to something more contemplative, "what it's like being you. Having that much power, that much responsibility. Does it ever feel lonely?" The question caught me off guard with its perceptiveness. Aria had always been more observant than she let on, apparently noticing things about my situation that I'd thought I was hiding successfully. "Sometimes," I admitted, because lying to her felt wrong even when the truth was complicated. "Power creates distance. People treat you differently when they know you could reshape reality if you wanted to. But not family," she said with the kind of certainty that made something in my chest tighten. "We still think of you as just Arthur. Our Arthur." The irony was almost painful. Aria believed our family was normal, that the only extraordinary thing about our household was my own development. She had no idea that our mother was a cosmic entity whose true nature operated on scales that transcended normal understanding. "That's what makes family important," I said carefully. "Having people who see you as a person rather than a position." "Exactly," she agreed with obvious satisfaction. "Which is why I wanted to tell you about the engagement personally. Because you're my brother first, and everything else second." The weight of unspoken truth settled between us like a physical presence. Aria's trust, her genuine affection, her belief in our family's normalcy. all of it built on foundations that weren't quite what she believed them to be. "When are you planning to tell Mom and Dad?" I asked, partly to change the subject but mostly because I was genuinely curious. "Tonight at dinner," she said with growing excitement. "Marcus is coming over, and we're going to make the announcement together. He's terrified of Dad, which is adorable." I smiled at that, remembering my own nervousness during early interactions with Douglas Nightingale. The reality of our father's background was complicated enough that I could understand Marcus's intimidation. "Dad likes him," I assured her, "and Mom thinks he's perfect for you." "I know," she said with obvious happiness, "but there's something special about making it official." As our conversation continued over impossibly expensive coffee, I found myself appreciating how these moments of normalcy had remained constant despite everything that had changed. Arya still teased me about being overprotective, still delighted in getting me to spend ridiculous amounts of money on her, still treated me like the big brother she'd always known rather than the legendary figure I'd somehow become. "You know," she said suddenly, studying my face with growing concern. "You look troubled. Is something wrong?" "Just thinking," I replied, which was technically accurate while avoiding the complex realities I couldn't easily explain. "About what?" she pressed with sisterly persistence. I looked at her for a long moment, weighing how much truth I could share without destroying the sense of normalcy that clearly meant so much to her. The knowledge of our mother's true nature was a burden I wasn't sure Arya was ready to carry. "About how much you mean to me," I said finally, which was completely true even if it wasn't the whole truth. "About how important it is that you're happy." "I am happy," she said with obvious sincerity. "Happier than I've ever been. I have a man who loves me, a family that supports me, and a future that looks bright. What more could anyone want?" The simple contentment in her voice made my decision for me. Whatever cosmic complexities defined our family situation, Arya had found genuine happiness within the framework she understood. Disrupting that happiness to satisfy my own discomfort with deception seemed cruel and unnecessary. "Nothing," I said with a smile that carried all the protective love I felt for her. "Nothing at all." "Will you be my best man?" she asked suddenly, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Of course," I replied without hesitation. "I'd be honored." "Good," she said with obvious relief. "Because having the second hero as your best man should guarantee that nothing goes wrong with the wedding ceremony. Or ensure that if something does go wrong, it gets fixed quickly," I added with dry humor. "Even better," she laughed, the sound carrying all the joy and confidence that made protecting her happiness feel like the most important responsibility I'd ever accepted. As we prepared to leave, finishing the last of our celestial coffee, I reflected on how some things remained beautifully constant. The setting was the same, the dynamic between us unchanged, but now I could afford to properly spoil my sister without worrying about the cost. "Same time next year?" Arya asked as we stood to leave. "Same time next year," I confirmed, "though hopefully the next occasion will be less expensive to celebrate." "Don't count on it," she replied with a grin that promised future adventures in premium-priced sibling bonding. Some traditions, I reflected as we walked out into Avalon City's afternoon bustle, were worth maintaining regardless of how much they cost. Chapter 878. Arya's News 3. The Nightingale family dinner had been scheduled for days, but Arya's engagement announcement gave the gathering additional significance that had everyone arriving with heightened anticipation. Our family's main dining room had been prepared with the kind of attention to detail that marked special occasions. The good china, carefully arranged flowers, and an atmosphere that balanced formality with genuine warmth. I arrived with Stella, Reka, Rose, and Cecilia, noting how the gathering had grown considerably larger than originally planned. When Cecilia and Rose had learned about the family dinner, both had insisted on attending, though for somewhat different reasons. "Remember," I said quietly as we approached the front door, "tonight is about Arya's happiness. Whatever else happens, that's the priority." "Of course, Daddy," Stella replied with the kind of serious attention she brought to all significant matters. "Aunt Arya's engagement is a momentous family development that deserves proper celebration." "Arthur, darling," Cecilia said with the kind of playful possessiveness that marked her approach to everything. You act like we'd cause problems at a family dinner. When have I ever been anything but perfectly charming? Would you like that list chronologically or alphabetically? Rose asked with dry humor, her brown eyes sparkling with amusement at Cecilia's mock indignation. Traitor, Cecilia replied without heat, though she moved closer to my arm with the kind of territorial behavior that was both endearing and potentially problematic in family settings. The front door opened before we could ring the bell, revealing our mother with the kind of welcoming smile that had never changed despite everything I now knew about her true nature. Alice Nightingale appeared exactly as she always had, elegant, warm, radiating maternal affection that made coming home feel like stepping into safety. Arthur, darling, she said, embracing me with genuine happiness. And my beautiful granddaughter Stella. Girls, you all look lovely. Mrs. Nightingale, Reka said with respectful warmth. Thank you for including us in tonight's celebration. Thank you for having us, Mrs. Nightingale, Rose added with genuine warmth. Mother, Cecilia said with the kind of familiarity that only she could get away with. Thank you for having us, though I do hope Arthur's been properly behaved during family time. When is he ever anything but? Our mother replied with obvious amusement, though I caught the knowing look she gave me that suggested she was perfectly aware of the complex dynamics involved in managing multiple fiancés. We were led into the main sitting area where the rest of the family had already gathered. Douglas sat in his favorite chair, looking every inch the successful patriarch despite the knowing gleam in his eyes that suggested he was perfectly aware of tonight's significance. Arya paced near the windows with barely contained excitement, while Marcus stood beside her looking like someone who was trying very hard not to appear nervous. Arthur, Arya called out the moment she saw me, her face lighting up with genuine happiness before her gaze shifted to my companions. And the entire entourage. Perfect timing. Entourage, Cecilia repeated with raised eyebrows. I prefer distinguished guests. I prefer family, Rose said quietly, settling into comfortable seating with the kind of grace that spoke to years of formal training. All of the above, I said diplomatically, noting how Marcus's nervousness had increased considerably upon realizing that tonight's dinner included not just the Nightingale family but also a duke's daughter and the Empire's princess. Arya shot me a look that carried both affection and mild exasperation. You could have warned me we were having a state dinner instead of a family announcement. Sorry, I replied with genuine contrition. Everyone wanted to be here for your good news. What good news? Cecilia asked with the kind of immediate attention that suggested she was always alert for interesting developments. Marcus cleared his throat with visible nervousness, clearly realizing that his audience had grown considerably larger and more politically significant than originally planned. Your Highness, Lady Rose, everyone. Arya and I wanted you all to hear this together. He took Arya's hand with visible affection, and I could see her squeeze his fingers encouragingly. Whatever nervousness he was feeling, her support was clearly providing the confidence he needed. Arya has agreed to marry me, he said with growing steadiness. We're engaged. The explosion of reaction was immediate and exactly what Arya had been hoping for. Our mother gasped with delight, Douglas broke into a genuine smile, and Stella clapped her hands with precise enthusiasm. Marcus, our mother exclaimed, rising to embrace him with immediate acceptance. Welcome to the family, officially this time. Congratulations, Rose said with warm sincerity, her formal manner softening into genuine happiness. Arya, you look radiant. About time, Cecilia added with characteristic directness, though her smile took any sting out of the words. You two have been circling each other for years. Thank you, Marcus replied with obvious relief, clearly grateful that the announcement had been received so positively despite the expanded audience. You'd better take good care of her, I said with mock menace that carried undertones of very real protectiveness. Because I know where you live. Arthur? Arya said with exasperated affection. Stop terrorizing my fiancé in front of the princess. I'm not terrorizing anyone, I replied with injured innocence. I'm simply establishing clear expectations. Your protective instincts are showing again, darling, Cecilia said with obvious amusement, her crimson eyes sparkling with the kind of mischief that suggested she was enjoying the family dynamics. They're supposed to show, Rekha said quietly, her violet eyes warm with understanding. It's what good brothers do. As dinner was served and the conversation shifted toward lighter topics, I found myself observing the complex social dynamics that had developed. Marcus gradually relaxed as it became obvious that acceptance into the Nightingale family was genuine, though he remained somewhat awed by the presence of imperial royalty and ducal nobility at what he'd expected to be a simple family dinner. Cecilia, predictably, had positioned herself to my right with the kind of casual possessiveness that made her territorial nature clear without being overtly inappropriate for family settings. Rose had taken the seat across from us, her more reserved nature allowing her to observe and participate without competing for attention. Rekha remained close enough that her presence felt like a constant source of warmth, her devoted attention providing stability in what could have become a complicated social situation. "Have you set a date?" our mother asked with practical enthusiasm. "Spring," Arya replied with obvious happiness. "We want enough time to plan properly, but not so long that we have to wait forever." "Spring weddings are lovely," Rose said with quiet authority. "The symbolism of new beginnings, gardens coming back to life. Perfect timing. Though you'll need to consider security arrangements," Cecilia added with the kind of practical awareness that came from growing up in politically significant family. Family events involving Arthur tend to attract attention. The table fell silent as everyone processed the implications. It was easy to forget, during these normal family moments, that my public status created complications for people I cared about. "We'll handle whatever security is needed," I said with firm authority. Arya's wedding day should be about her happiness, not managing external pressures. The Imperial Security Services can provide discreet protection, Cecilia offered with the kind of casual authority that reminded everyone present exactly who she was. "Consider it a wedding gift." "That's incredibly generous," Marcus said with obvious amazement, clearly still processing that he was receiving offers of imperial protection for his wedding. "Family takes care of family," Cecilia replied with a smile that was both warm and faintly predatory. "And Arthur's family is my family." "Our family," Rose corrected gently, though her tone carried steel that suggested she wouldn't accept any attempt to exclude her from that categorization. "Of course," Cecilia agreed with the kind of gracious acceptance that didn't quite hide her competitive nature. "All of us." As the evening continued and conversation shifted toward wedding planning and family memories, I reflected on how much more complex these gatherings had become as my personal relationships evolved. Managing the dynamics between multiple fiancés who all cared deeply about being included in family events required diplomatic skills that hadn't been covered in any heroic training. "Uncle Marcus," Stella said at one point, using the family title with careful precision, "have you considered the logistical implications of coordinating a wedding that will likely attract significant public attention?" Marcus blinked with surprise at the question's sophistication. "Public attention? Arthur is the second hero," Stella explained patiently. "Family events involving him generate media interest and security considerations. Nothing dramatic," our mother assured him with the kind of calm that suggested she'd dealt with similar considerations before. "Just normal precautions when prominent families gather." "I don't want my wedding to become a political event," Arya said with growing concern. "It won't," I said with absolute certainty. "Whatever arrangements need to be made, we'll handle them quietly. Your wedding day will be exactly what you want it to be. Promise?" she asked with vulnerable trust that reminded me she was still my little sister, regardless of her adult confidence. "Promise," I confirmed without hesitation. "We'll make sure of it," Cecilia added with the kind of authority that reminded everyone she commanded significant resources. Between imperial security, ducal connections, and Arthur's legendary status, your wedding will be perfectly protected and completely focused on your happiness. "Exactly," Rose agreed with quiet conviction. "This is what family does for each other." As the dinner wound down and goodbyes were exchanged, I found myself appreciating how my chosen family had embraced my blood family so completely. Despite the potential for jealousy or competition, all three of my fiancés had focused entirely on ensuring Arya felt supported and celebrated. Chapter 879. Fun with Stella 1. Daddy, can we get ice cream after this? Stella asked, bouncing slightly in her chair as she watched me sort through a stack of intelligence reports. Her black hair was messier than usual, having spent the morning building some kind of contraption in the workshop. After what? I asked with amusement, noting how she'd managed to get what looked like motor oil on her sleeve despite supposedly working on theoretical projects. After you finish reading all those boring papers, she said, making a face at the documents spread across my desk. You've been at it for forever. It's been 45 minutes, Rekha said with gentle correction as she entered carrying a tray of snacks. Though I suppose that does feel like forever when you're 12. See? Forever, Stella said triumphantly, grabbing one of the cookies from Rekha's tray. Besides, it's Saturday. Saturdays are for fun stuff, not work stuff. I had to admit she had a point. The intelligence reports could wait, and spending time with family was more important than reviewing routine Continental updates. All right, I said, closing the folder. Ice cream it is. But first, show me this project you've been working on. Stella's eyes lit up with excitement as she jumped from her chair. Really? You want to see it? It's super cool, I promise. She led us to the workshop area we'd set up for her various experiments, chattering excitedly about circuits and power sources and theoretical applications. The space looked like a tornado had hit it, with components scattered across multiple work surfaces and what appeared to be the remains of several failed prototypes. Okay, so remember how you said mana and technology don't always work well together for people without mana? She said, pulling a cloth off her latest creation. Well, I think I figured out a way to make them cooperate. The device underneath looked like someone had crossed a music box with a small computer and added entirely too many blinking lights. It was clearly the work of someone brilliant who was also definitely 12 years old. It's supposed to help people without mana understand how magical energy flows work, she explained proudly. It visualizes the patterns so normal people can see what mages actually do. I studied the device with growing amazement. The theory behind it was sophisticated, but the execution had the kind of creative chaos that only came from young minds unencumbered by conventional thinking. Can you demonstrate it? Rose asked as she and Cecilia joined us, both having finished their morning training session. Of course, Stella said, practically vibrating with excitement as she activated the device. The result was immediate and impressive. Colorful light patterns filled the air above the device, showing swirling energy flows that corresponded to the natural mana currents running through our estate. It was beautiful, educational, and completely unprecedented. Stella, this is incredible, I said with genuine amazement. You've created something that could help millions of people understand magical theory. Really? She asked, beaming with pride. I was worried it was too simple or something. Simple is good, Cecilia said with obvious admiration. The best innovations are the ones that make complex things accessible to everyone. Can we patent it? Stella asked with sudden business-minded focus that reminded me she was definitely a nightingale. I looked it up, and you can make lots of money from inventions. We can explore that, I replied with amusement at her entrepreneurial instincts. The rest of the morning was spent helping Stella refine her invention while Rose and Cecilia shared details about their recent advancement to Radiant rank. Both had achieved the breakthrough within days of each other, their competitive natures driving them to push harder when they realized the other was approaching the same threshold. The integration process was smoother than expected, Rose said as we moved to the main sitting room for lunch. Having Cecilia as a training partner definitely accelerated development. Mutual motivation, Cecilia agreed with satisfaction, though I still say my technique was more elegant. Your technique looked like you were dancing, Rose replied with dry humor. Mine actually resembled proper martial forms. Dancing can be very effective, Stella chimed in while assembling what appeared to be a sandwich tower of questionable architectural integrity. There's lots of physics involved in balance and momentum and stuff. See, Cecilia said triumphantly. Stella understands artistic combat expression. I understand that you looked silly, Stella said with the brutal honesty that only children could manage, causing Rose to snort with laughter. As afternoon approached, we made good on the promised ice cream expedition, taking one of the family vehicles into Avalon City's commercial district. Stella insisted on the window seat so she could point out interesting architectural features and speculate about the engineering challenges involved in building structures that supported both magical and technological systems. That building there, she said, pressing her nose against the glass, has to have some kind of mana-dampening field built into the foundation. Otherwise, all the electronics would fry every time someone cast a spell inside. Very observant, I said, noting how her analytical mind worked even during casual outings. I pay attention to stuff, she replied with a shrug. Most grown-ups don't notice the cool engineering things because they're too busy worrying about boring adult stuff. The ice cream parlor we chose was one of Avalon City's more famous establishments, known for exotic flavors that incorporated magical ingredients for enhanced taste and minor beneficial effects. Stella ordered something called Starlight Swirl, that apparently contained actual crystallized mana and promised to improve mental clarity for several hours. Is it working? Reika asked as Stella worked her way through the elaborate confection. I think so, Stella said thoughtfully. Either that or ice cream is just really good at making you happy. Both can be true, Rose observed with gentle amusement. As we made our way home through the city's evening traffic, I found myself appreciating how these simple family outings had become increasingly precious. Stella's excitement about her inventions, her unfiltered observations about the world around her, her ability to find wonder in everyday things. It all served as a reminder of what really mattered. Daddy, she said as we pulled into our estate's driveway, tomorrow can we work on making my device smaller? I think if we could fit it into something portable, kids at schools could use them to learn about magic even if they don't have any themselves. That's a wonderful idea, I replied, once again amazed by her combination of technical brilliance and genuine desire to help others. Cool, she said, bouncing out of the vehicle with renewed energy. This is going to be the best project ever. As evening settled over Avalon City and we prepared for a quiet dinner at home, I reflected on how much joy Stella brought to our household simply by being herself. Curious, creative, and completely unimpressed by status or power in favor of genuine accomplishment and kindness. Some things, I realized, were worth protecting not because they were powerful or politically significant, but because they represented the best of what life could offer when people were free to grow and create and dream without fear. And Stella's laughter echoing through our home as she explained her latest theoretical breakthrough to anyone willing to listen. That was definitely one of those things. Chapter 880. Fun with Stella, too. The next few days settled into a comfortable routine that felt like the kind of normalcy I'd always hoped to build. Mornings were spent reviewing necessary paperwork while Stella worked on improving her mana visualization device. Afternoons involved training sessions with Rose and Cecilia as they consolidated their new Radiant rank abilities, and evenings were reserved for family time that reminded me why all the cosmic responsibilities were worthwhile. Look, look, Stella called from her workshop, her voice carrying the kind of excitement that usually meant either breakthrough discovery or minor explosion. I made it portable. I found her holding what appeared to be a device about the size of a tablet, though considerably more complex. The original chaos of blinking lights had been organized into elegant patterns that somehow managed to look both sophisticated and distinctly like the work of a 12-year-old inventor. It's perfect for classrooms now, she said proudly, activating the device to demonstrate. Kids can pass it around and see exactly how mana flows work, even if they can't sense it themselves. That's remarkable progress, I said with genuine amazement. You've managed to compress all that functionality into something truly practical. I had help, she admitted with unusual modesty. Reika showed me some organizational tricks, and Rose helped with the aesthetic design. Oh, and Cecilia threatened to critique my engineering if I didn't make it pretty enough. Constructive feedback, I said with amusement. She said it looked like a pile of exploded electronics held together with hope and glue, Stella said with a giggle. She wasn't wrong. The afternoon brought one of Rose and Cecilia's joint training sessions, which had become increasingly impressive as they learned to coordinate their newly enhanced abilities. Watching them spar was like observing a carefully choreographed dance, each fighter's strengths complementing the other's style. They're getting scary good at that, Stella observed as we watched from the estate's observation deck. Like, really scary. I'm glad they're on our side. Teamwork multiplies individual capability. I agreed, noting how their coordination had reached levels that would make them formidable opponents for most threats. Plus, they both get really competitive when they're training together, Stella added with the kind of perceptive observation that reminded me she understood people better than most adults. It makes them push harder than they would alone. As evening approached and the training session concluded, I found myself alone with Rose in the estate's library while she reviewed some documents related to her family's holdings. Her auburn hair caught the lamplight as she worked, brown eyes focused with the kind of intensity that marked important matters. "Rose," I said quietly, settling into the chair beside her desk. "There's something we need to discuss." She looked up immediately, noting the seriousness in my tone. "What is it?" "Your mother," I said carefully. "Evelyn. We both know that eventually, confronting her will become necessary." Rose's expression shifted to something harder, though I could see the pain beneath her controlled exterior. The corruption that had transformed her once loving mother into a demonic threat was a wound that would never fully heal. "I've been thinking about that constantly since reaching Radiant rank," she said with quiet firmness. "And I've made a decision." "What kind of decision?" "When the time comes to stop her," Rose said with growing resolve, "it has to be me. Not you, not anyone else. Me." I studied her face, seeing the determination that spoke to months of internal struggle. "You're sure about this?" "Completely sure," she replied without hesitation. "She's my mother, Arthur. If anyone has the right, the responsibility to end what she's become, it should be me." "Even knowing the risks?" I asked gently. "Evelyn is dangerous, Rose. More dangerous than most people could handle, even at Radiant rank." "I know the risks," she said with steady conviction. "But this isn't about tactical efficiency or minimizing danger. It's about responsibility, about closure, about making sure that the person who loved her most is also the one who ensures she can't hurt anyone else." The weight of her decision settled between us. I could see that this wasn't an impulse or emotional reaction. It was a carefully considered choice that reflected her understanding of both duty and grief. "If that's what you need," I said with complete sincerity, "then I promise I won't interfere. When the time comes, the decision will be entirely yours." "You mean that?" she asked with something approaching amazement. "You'd let me face her alone?" "I'd provide whatever support you needed," I clarified. "Protection, backup, resources, anything. But the final confrontation would be your choice to make." Rose stared at me for several seconds, processing the magnitude of what I just promised. "Arthur, you have no idea what this means to me." "I think I do," I replied gently. "Some responsibilities can't be shared, no matter how much people who love you want to help carry the burden." "Exactly," she said with grateful understanding. "Thank you for understanding why this matters. Family means supporting each other's most important decisions," I said simply, "even when those decisions are difficult." The following morning brought the kind of peaceful domesticity that had become our standard. Stella was already working on her device modifications, having apparently woken up with new ideas for improvement. Rekha coordinated her expanding charitable initiatives through a series of video conferences with organizations across the continent. Rose and Cecilia maintained their training schedule, each session building their coordination and mutual understanding. "The foster family program is exceeding all projections," Rekha reported as we shared breakfast. "We've helped place 37 children in stable homes this month alone." "That's incredible," I said with genuine satisfaction. "Your work is making a real difference." "Stella's organizational suggestions have been invaluable," Rekha continued with obvious appreciation. Her systematic approach to resource allocation has improved our efficiency tremendously. Math makes everything better, Stella said cheerfully around a mouthful of toast. Well, except vegetables. Math can't make vegetables taste good. I thought you liked vegetables, Cecilia said with amusement. I like some vegetables, Stella clarified. Carrots are okay. Broccoli is evil, and no amount of mathematics will change that. The comfortable morning routine continued as I handled routine correspondence and reviewed intelligence reports that kept me informed about continental developments. Nothing urgent, nothing that required immediate attention, just the steady flow of information that helped maintain awareness of potential future concerns. Stella had spread her device components across the main sitting room, explaining her latest modifications to anyone willing to listen. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and even Cecilia had been drawn into providing suggestions for aesthetic improvements. If you're going to revolutionize magical education, Cecilia had said with characteristic directness, it should at least look professional enough that teachers will want to use it. It's not about looking professional, Stella had replied with 12-year-old logic. It's about working really well and being fun to use. Both can be true, Rose had observed diplomatically. Everything was proceeding exactly as it should, with the kind of productive peace that made domestic life feel genuinely fulfilling. The intelligence reports showed no immediate threats. The family projects were advancing successfully, and even the weather was cooperating with plans for an outdoor lunch. Then pain exploded through my consciousness. Not physical pain, something deeper, more fundamental. A surge of terror and desperation that wasn't my own, transmitted through a bond I'd almost forgotten in the peaceful routine of recent weeks. Luna, my bonded Qilin, somewhere where she'd gone to train, was in mortal danger.